Bear destroys $120,000 RV with family inside. June 28, 2024. The morning of June 27, 2024, dawned crisp and clear across the vast expanse of Denali National Park, Alaska, with temperatures hovering just above 42 degrees Fahrenheit, as Stephen Mitchell completed his final inspection of the 2023 Winnebago Journey motorhome that would serve as his family's mobile base camp for what he had planned as the adventure of a lifetime. The 38-foot Class A recreational vehicle, valued at precisely $127,850, according to the insurance documentation folded neatly in Stephen's jacket pocket, represented nearly 3 years of meticulous saving and planning for the Mitchell family vacation that had been discussed around their dinner table in suburban Denver, Colorado, since his daughter Lily had first expressed fascination with Alaska during an elementary school geography presentation 2 years earlier. Stephen Marcus Mitchell, 43 years old, stood 6 feet 2 inches tall, with the lean build of a man who had maintained his physical conditioning through decades of weekend hiking in the Colorado Rockies. His graying brown hair cropped short in the practical style he had adopted during his 20-year career as a mechanical engineer, specializing in aerospace hydraulic systems for Lockheed Martin. His wife, Rebecca Ann Mitchell, née Thompson, 39 years old with auburn hair that caught the morning light, as she emerged from the RV carrying a steaming cup of coffee in her favorite ceramic mug decorated with cartoon bears that had been a gift from Lily the previous Christmas, had taken a leave of absence from her position as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, Colorado, to make this month-long journey possible. Their daughter, Lily Marie Mitchell, 8 years old with her mother's auburn curls and her father's inquisitive green eyes, had completed 2nd grade at Columbine Elementary School just 3 weeks earlier, and had been counting down the days to this Alaskan adventure with the methodical precision of a child who had circled every date on her bedroom calendar with increasingly elaborate colored markers. The Mitchell family had departed Denver on June 20th, 2024. Following the carefully plotted route that Stephen had mapped using multiple GPS systems and printed backup materials, traveling through Wyoming, Montana, and the western provinces of Canada before crossing into Alaska via the Alaska Highway, documenting every mile of their journey with the obsessive thoroughness that had made Stephen successful in his engineering career, and would later provide investigators with a comprehensive timeline of the family's movements leading up to the events of June 28th. Their travel log, discovered intact in the RV's dashboard compartment after the incident, revealed they had covered 2,847 miles over 7 days, stopping at predetermined campgrounds and RV parks that Stephen had researched and reserved months in advance, maintaining an average daily travel distance of 407 miles, while adhering to the conservative driving schedule that Rebecca had insisted upon to ensure they would not arrive at Denali fatigued or unprepared for the wilderness experience that awaited them. The Riley Creek Campground at Mile 0, 2 of the Park Road in Denali National Park, had been their destination since Stephen first submitted their reservation request through the National Park Service website on February 14, 2024, securing campsite 47B in Loop C, a premium location that provided both electrical hookups for their RV's systems and direct access to the wilderness trails that Lily had been eager to explore since first seeing photographs of Denali's wildlife in the National Geographic magazines that Stephen collected in his home office. The campsite, measuring approximately 40 feet by 60 feet, was bordered by mature spruce trees on 3 sides and offered an unobstructed view toward the Alaska Range, where Mount Denali itself remained partially obscured by the persistent cloud cover that characterized the region during late June. though the family had been assured by park rangers that clear viewing conditions were expected within the next several days. Rebecca had spent the evening of June 27th organizing their camping supplies with the systematic approach that had made her an exceptional pediatric nurse, creating detailed inventories of their food stores, first aid supplies, and emergency equipment, while Stephen performed his nightly maintenance check of the RV's mechanical systems, a ritual that included monitoring tire pressure, checking fluid levels, and testing the operation of all electrical systems, including the critical carbon monoxide detectors and smoke alarms that had been professionally inspected and certified before their departure from Denver. Lily had fallen asleep in the RV's rear bedroom while reading a children's book about Alaskan wildlife, her bookmark placed precisely at page 67, where a chapter about grizzly bear behavior began, a detail that would be noted by investigators who would later examine every aspect of the family's final hours with forensic precision. The morning of June 28, 2024, began at 5:47 a.m., when Stephen's travel alarm clock sounded in the RV's master bedroom, initiating what had become their standard morning routine during the week-long journey through Alaska's interior. Stephen emerged first, as was his custom, to begin the process of brewing coffee using the RV's built-in kitchen systems, while conducting his morning inspection of their campsite and the surrounding area for any signs of wildlife activity that might have occurred during the night hours. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, creating a thin layer of frost on the RV's exterior surfaces and the picnic table that came with their assigned campsite. But the weather forecast called for clearing skies and temperatures reaching the mid-60s by afternoon, conditions that Stephen had determined would be ideal for the family hiking expedition they had planned to begin at 9 a.m. sharp. Rebecca joined her husband at 6:15 a.m., accepting the cup of coffee he had prepared according to her precise specifications, 2 sugars and a measured amount of the powdered creamer they had brought from home, because Alaska's remote locations might not stock her preferred brand, and together they stood on the RV's retractable awning steps to observe the gradual lightening of the sky above the Alaska Range while discussing their planned route for the day's adventure. The Horseshoe Lake Trail had been selected from among dozens of possibilities because it offered a moderate 1.5-mile hiking loop that park rangers had assured them was appropriate for families with children, featuring interpretive signs that would help Lily identify the various plant and animal species they might encounter while remaining within the relatively safe confines of the park's developed trail system, where emergency assistance would be readily available if needed. Lily Mitchell emerged from the RV at 6:43 a.m. wearing her new hiking boots, a pair of waterproof Merrell children's boots in size 2 that Rebecca had purchased specifically for this trip, along with moisture-wicking socks designed to prevent blisters during extended walking, her excitement evident in the animated way she described her dreams from the previous night, which had featured a friendly cartoon bear who had offered to guide her family through the Alaskan wilderness while teaching them about the various berries and plants that wild animals used for food and medicine. Stephen listened to his daughter's enthusiastic narrative while simultaneously conducting his standard pre-departure checklist, a systematic inspection that included securing all loose items within the RV's interior, checking that all windows and vents were properly closed and locked, and ensuring that the RV's stabilizing jacks were retracted and all external connections were properly stored in their designated compartments. At 7:30 a.m., the Mitchell family gathered around their campsite's picnic table for breakfast, a meal that Rebecca had planned to provide sustained energy for their hiking adventure, while incorporating foods that Lily would find appealing enough to eat without complaint, a constant challenge that any parent of an 8-year-old would recognize as requiring careful negotiation and compromise. The menu included instant oatmeal with dried fruit and nuts, whole grain toast prepared using the RV's compact toaster, fresh orange juice that Stephen had purchased at their last supply stop in Fairbanks, and the special trail mix that Lily had helped prepare during their journey north. Combining her favorite chocolate chips with dried cranberries, almonds, and sunflower seeds in proportions that she had determined through careful experimentation during previous family camping trips. The conversation during breakfast centered on Lily's questions about the wildlife they might encounter during their hike, with Stephen providing detailed explanations drawn from the extensive research he had conducted using field guides, National Park Service publications, and online resources that he had printed and organized in a 3-ring binder that occupied a permanent place on the RV's dining table. Rebecca contributed information from her nursing background about wilderness first aid and safety procedures, though she was careful to present this information in ways that would inform and prepare Lily without creating anxiety or fear about the adventure that lay ahead. The family's discussion included specific protocols for encountering various types of wildlife, with particular emphasis on bear safety procedures that Stephen had memorized from multiple authoritative sources, including the Alaska Department of Fish and Game and the National Park Service's official wildlife safety guidelines. At 8:15 a.m., Stephen initiated the process of securing their campsite for their planned absence, a systematic procedure that he had developed through years of camping experience and had refined during their week-long journey to Alaska. This process included storing all food items in the bear-proof storage containers provided at each campsite, securing the RV's exterior storage compartments with the heavy-duty locks that had been professionally installed before their departure from Denver, and ensuring that no items remained visible that might attract wildlife attention to their campsite during their absence. The bear-proof storage containers, manufactured from heavy-gauge steel and designed to withstand determined efforts by even large adult grizzly bears to access food sources, had been inspected by Stephen upon their arrival and found to be in excellent condition with properly functioning locking mechanisms that required the specific technique demonstrated by park rangers during the mandatory safety briefing that all visitors received upon entering Denali National Park. Rebecca spent the final preparation time organizing their day hiking supplies, using the lightweight internal frame backpack that she had purchased from REI during their pre-trip equipment shopping expedition, carefully distributing the weight of their supplies to ensure comfortable carrying, while including all items that Stephen had deemed essential for their safety and emergency preparedness. The backpack's contents included a comprehensive first aid kit that Rebecca had assembled using her medical knowledge and experience treating injuries in children, emergency food supplies consisting of high-energy trail bars and electrolyte replacement packets, water purification tablets as backup to their primary water supplies, a waterproof emergency shelter that could accommodate all 3 family members if weather conditions required them to seek temporary protection, fire-starting materials, including waterproof matches and emergency tinder, and a signaling mirror and whistle for attracting rescue attention in case of emergency separation or injury. At 8:45 a.m., the Mitchell family departed their campsite on foot, following the well-marked trail system that led toward Horseshoe Lake, while maintaining the steady walking pace that Stephen had calculated would allow them to complete the 1.5-mile loop trail in approximately 2 hours, while allowing adequate time for wildlife observation and photography stops that Lily had requested as essential components of their wilderness experience. Stephen carried the primary navigation equipment, including a handheld GPS device that he had programmed with their planned route and key waypoints, a detailed topographical map of the area printed on waterproof paper, and a backup compass that he had learned to use during his Boy Scout years and had maintained proficiency with through regular practice during their Colorado hiking adventures. The morning air was crisp and clear as they began their hike, with visibility extending for several miles across the park's vast wilderness areas, and the snow-capped peaks of the Alaska Range visible in the distance, creating the spectacular scenic backdrop that had motivated the Mitchell family to undertake this ambitious vacation adventure, despite the significant financial investment and complex logistical planning that the trip had required. Lily walked between her parents, maintaining the formation that they had established during previous hiking experiences, allowing both Stephen and Rebecca to keep their daughter within close visual contact, while positioning themselves to provide immediate assistance if she encountered any difficulties with the trail's terrain or pace. The Horseshoe Lake Trail followed a well-maintained path through typical interior Alaska boreal forest, featuring mature white spruce and paper birch trees that created a canopy providing intermittent shade while allowing filtered sunlight to illuminate the understory vegetation, consisting of various berry-producing shrubs, including blueberries, lingonberries, and cloudberries that were beginning to ripen in the late June growing season. Stephen pointed out various plant species to Lily using the field identification guide that he carried, explaining their ecological roles and their importance as food sources for the diverse wildlife population that inhabited Denali National Park, while Rebecca contributed observations about the medicinal properties of certain plants that indigenous Alaskan peoples had traditionally used for treating various ailments and health conditions. At 9:23 a.m., the family reached their first significant wildlife observation when Lily spotted a red squirrel gathering spruce cones in preparation for winter storage, leading to an extended discussion about animal behavior and survival adaptations that kept them stationary for nearly 15 minutes, while Stephen attempted to photograph the squirrel using the digital camera that had been one of his few concessions to modern technology during trip planning. The red squirrel, apparently accustomed to human presence along this frequently traveled trail, continued its foraging activities while the Mitchell family observed from a respectful distance, providing Lily with her first opportunity to witness authentic wilderness wildlife behavior rather than the controlled environment presentations she had experienced during previous zoo and nature center visits. The trail continued through gradually changing terrain as they progressed toward Horseshoe Lake, with the elevation increasing by approximately 200 feet over the course of the first mile. A gradual ascent that Stephen had determined would be easily manageable for Lily while providing cardiovascular exercise benefits for all three family members. Rebecca monitored Lily's energy level and hydration status, using the observational skills she had developed through years of pediatric nursing, ensuring that their hiking pace remained appropriate for a child's endurance capabilities, while watching for any signs of fatigue or discomfort that might indicate the need for rest stops or route modifications. At 9:51 a.m., they encountered their second wildlife observation when a family of gray jays approached their location, apparently hoping to receive food offerings from the human visitors, leading Stephen to provide a detailed explanation of park regulations prohibiting the feeding of wildlife and the ecological reasons why human food sources could be harmful to wild animals' health and natural behavior patterns. The gray jays remained in the vicinity for several minutes, providing Lily with opportunities to observe their social interactions and feeding behaviors, while Stephen attempted additional photography using various camera settings and positions to capture the birds' distinctive plumage patterns and behavioral characteristics. The approach to Horseshoe Lake became visible at 10:17 a.m. when the trail emerged from the dense forest cover into a more open area dominated by low shrubs and grasses, revealing the lake's distinctive horseshoe shape that had provided its name and creating the scenic vista that Stephen had selected as their primary destination based on photographs he had studied during trip planning. The lake, approximately 400 yards long and 200 yards wide at its maximum dimensions, reflected the surrounding forest and mountains in its calm surface waters, creating the mirror-like effect that made this location particularly popular with photographers and nature enthusiasts who visited Denali National Park during the brief summer season, when weather conditions permitted extended outdoor activities. Lily's excitement reached new heights as she observed the lake's surface for signs of wildlife activity, hoping to spot the waterfowl species that her wildlife identification books had indicated were common in this type of habitat during the summer months. Stephen began setting up his photography equipment to document their successful completion of the hike to their planned destination, while Rebecca selected a suitable location for their planned rest stop and snack break, choosing a fallen log that provided comfortable seating while maintaining clear sight lines in all directions, as recommended by the wilderness safety protocols they had studied during trip preparation. At 10:34 a.m., Rebecca first noticed unusual movement in the brush approximately 150 yards away on the opposite side of Horseshoe Lake, initially dismissing the disturbance as likely caused by wind or perhaps a small animal foraging among the vegetation, but continuing to observe the area with the heightened awareness that her medical training had developed for identifying potentially significant changes in environmental conditions. The movement appeared intermittent and inconsistent with wind patterns, leading her to alert Stephen to the possibility that they might be observing wildlife activity that could provide additional opportunities for observation and photography if they remained patient and maintained their current position, without creating disturbances that might frighten away any animals that might be approaching the lake for water. Stephen immediately focused his attention on the area that Rebecca had indicated, using the binoculars that he carried as standard hiking equipment to obtain a clearer view of the movement patterns, while instructing Lily to remain quiet and stationary to avoid disturbing whatever wildlife might be present in their vicinity. The binoculars, a pair of Nikon 8x42 models that he had researched extensively before purchasing for this trip, provided magnification sufficient to identify the source of the movement as a large, dark-colored animal moving through the brush in a deliberate pattern that suggested foraging behavior rather than random wandering, though the dense vegetation and intervening distance made specific identification impossible without continued observation. At 10:41 a.m., the animal emerged partially into a small clearing on the lake's far shore, allowing Stephen to identify it definitively as an adult grizzly bear, estimated to weigh approximately 400 pounds based on his comparison with reference materials he had studied, exhibiting the distinctive shoulder hump and facial profile that distinguished grizzly bears from the black bears that also inhabited the region, but were generally smaller and less potentially dangerous to human visitors. Stephen's initial reaction combined excitement at this remarkable wildlife observation opportunity with immediate concern for his family's safety, leading him to quietly alert Rebecca and Lily to the bear's presence, while beginning to implement the safety protocols that they had discussed extensively during trip planning and that were emphasized in all park literature and ranger presentations. The grizzly bear appeared to be engaged in typical foraging behavior, using its powerful claws to dig in areas where edible roots or ground-dwelling insects might be available, while periodically raising its head to sample air currents for scents that might indicate food sources or potential threats in the surrounding area. Stephen observed the bear's behavior through his binoculars while simultaneously calculating distances and escape routes, determining that their current position provided reasonable safety margin given the lake's intervening presence and the bear's apparent focus on foraging activities rather than any awareness of the human family's presence in the area. Rebecca's nursing experience had included emergency preparedness training that covered various types of traumatic injuries, including those that might result from wildlife encounters, though her knowledge was primarily theoretical, since actual bear attacks were extremely rare, even in wilderness areas where bears were known to be present, with statistical analysis indicating that visitors to Denali National Park had far greater probability of injury from vehicle accidents or hiking falls than from encounters with dangerous wildlife. Nevertheless, her professional training had instilled systematic approaches to emergency assessment and response that she began to mentally review while observing the bear's behavior and considering various scenarios that might develop depending on the animal's subsequent movements and activities. At 10:48 a.m., Lily whispered excitedly that she could see the bear even without binoculars, leading Stephen to allow her to use his binoculars for a brief observation period while he maintained visual contact using his unaided vision and considered whether they should remain in position to continue observing or begin a gradual withdrawal from the area to ensure adequate safety margins. The decision involved balancing multiple factors, including the educational value of this remarkable wildlife observation opportunity against the potential risks associated with remaining in proximity to a large predator, even one that appeared to be engaged in peaceful foraging behavior and showed no signs of awareness regarding the human presence across the lake. The bear continued its foraging activities for approximately 12 minutes, during which time the Mitchell family maintained their position while documenting the encounter through photography and written notes that Stephen recorded in the small notebook he carried for recording significant observations during their travels. The bear's behavior appeared entirely typical for its species during summer months, when grizzly bears spend most daylight hours foraging to accumulate the body fat reserves necessary for surviving winter hibernation, consuming a varied diet including vegetation, berries, roots, insects, and occasional fish or small mammals, depending on availability and seasonal patterns. At 11:03 a.m., the bear began moving along the lakeshore in a direction that would gradually bring it closer to the Mitchell family's position, though still maintaining considerable distance and showing no signs of particular interest in their location or awareness of their presence. Stephen made the decision to begin a slow and careful withdrawal from their current position, implementing the recommended protocols for safely disengaging from wildlife encounters by moving slowly and deliberately while avoiding sudden movements or loud sounds that might attract the bear's attention or provoke defensive behaviors. The family began their withdrawal by slowly backing away from the lakeshore while maintaining visual contact with the bear's position and movements, using the established trail system to ensure secure footing while increasing the distance between themselves and the potential wildlife hazard. Stephen led the withdrawal while carrying his camera equipment and navigation tools, followed by Lily, who had been instructed to walk quietly and avoid any sudden movements, with Rebecca bringing up the rear position where she could monitor both the bear's activities and her family's progress, while being prepared to respond to any emergency situations that might develop. At 11:17 a.m., when they had achieved what Stephen calculated to be approximately 300 yards distance from the bear's last observed position, the family paused to reassess the situation and determine their next course of action, with Stephen using his binoculars to relocate the bear and confirm its continued engagement in foraging activities without apparent interest in pursuing or following their movements. The bear had continued moving along the lakeshore and was now positioned at approximately 200 yards from their original observation point, still focused on foraging behavior and showing no signs of the alertness or attention that would indicate awareness of human presence in the area. Rebecca suggested that they should continue their planned return route to the campground rather than attempting to complete their intended circuit of the lake trail, a recommendation that Stephen immediately accepted as the most prudent course of action, given their wildlife encounter and the unpredictable nature of grizzly bear behavior, even under apparently benign circumstances. The decision to modify their hiking plans represented the type of conservative safety approach that had guided their trip planning and would later be noted by investigators as evidence of the family's responsible attitude toward wilderness safety and their appropriate recognition of potential hazards. The return journey along the trail proceeded without incident for the first 25 minutes, during which time the family maintained heightened awareness of their surroundings, while gradually relaxing as the distance from their wildlife encounter increased, and the familiar trail environment provided reassurance that they were returning to the safety and security of the developed campground area where park rangers maintained regular patrols and emergency assistance would be readily available if needed. Stephen periodically checked behind them, using his binoculars to ensure that the bear had not begun following their route, though such behavior would be extremely unusual for grizzly bears that had not been attracted by food sources or had not perceived humans as threatening their cubs or territory. At 11:44 a.m., Lily requested a rest stop to retie her hiking boot laces, which had become loose during their accelerated return pace, providing an opportunity for the family to consume water and energy snacks, while Stephen conducted another visual sweep of the area behind them, using his binoculars to confirm continued absence of wildlife in their vicinity. The rest stop location, selected for its clear sightlines and proximity to the main trail, provided psychological reassurance through its obviously safe and controlled environment, while allowing the family to discuss their remarkable wildlife observation experience and begin processing the excitement and educational value of their successful bear encounter. Rebecca used the rest stop opportunity to assess Lily's physical and emotional condition, applying her pediatric nursing expertise to ensure that their daughter was handling the excitement and minor stress of the wildlife encounter appropriately, without developing anxiety or fear that might impact her enjoyment of their remaining vacation activities. Lily's responses indicated healthy excitement and curiosity about the bear they had observed, with questions about bear behavior and biology that demonstrated her engagement with the educational aspects of their wilderness experience, rather than fear or concern about safety issues. The final portion of their return hike proceeded along the familiar trail route they had used earlier that morning, though Stephen noted that their return pace was considerably faster than their outbound hiking speed, due to their eagerness to return to the campground and share news of their wildlife encounter with other camping families and park rangers who would be interested in receiving reports about bear activity in the Horseshoe Lake area. The trail conditions remained excellent with clear weather, providing good visibility and comfortable temperatures that made hiking pleasant despite their accelerated pace. At 12:23 p.m., the Mitchell family reached the junction where the Horseshoe Lake Trail connected with the main campground trail system, marking their successful return to the developed area of Riley Creek Campground, where they could see other families engaged in typical camping activities and where the presence of park rangers and other visitors provided reassurance about their safety and security after their wilderness adventure and wildlife encounter. Stephen paused at the trail junction to record their successful completion of the hike in his trip log, noting the precise times of their departure and return, along with details about trail conditions and their bear observation that might be useful for other hikers planning similar excursions. The approach to their campsite revealed their RV exactly as they had left it several hours earlier, with all security measures intact and no signs of wildlife interference with their camp setup, confirming the effectiveness of the bear-proof storage systems and site security procedures that Stephen had implemented before their departure. The sight of their familiar temporary home provided psychological relief after their extended wilderness exposure and wildlife encounter, representing safety and security while also serving as base camp for planning their next day's activities within Denali National Park's extensive trail system and wilderness areas. At 12:31 p.m., the family arrived at their campsite, where Stephen immediately began the process of securing their hiking equipment and documenting their morning's adventure through written notes and photographic evidence that would serve as permanent records of their successful wildlife observation and would provide material for sharing their experience with friends and family members after their return to Colorado. Rebecca focused on preparing lunch using ingredients from their carefully planned food supplies, while Lily organized her collection of interesting rocks and pine cones that she had gathered during their hike, creating a physical memento of their Alaskan wilderness experience. Stephen's post-hike documentation process included downloading digital photographs from his camera to the laptop computer that he had brought for maintaining electronic records of their trip, while also updating his written trip log with detailed descriptions of their route, timing, weather conditions, and wildlife observations that would serve as reference material for planning future outdoor adventures, and would provide accurate information for sharing with other families considering similar wilderness experiences. The photographs, numbering 37 images, including several clear shots of the grizzly bear engaged in foraging behavior, represented exceptional documentation of wildlife behavior in natural habitat conditions. Lunch preparation provided an opportunity for the family to decompress from their morning adventure while planning their afternoon activities, with Stephen suggesting that they might explore some of the shorter nature trails near the campground that would provide additional opportunities for wildlife observation and botanical education without requiring the extended hiking commitment of their morning excursion to Horseshoe Lake. Rebecca supported this suggestion, while adding that a more relaxed afternoon schedule would allow them to process their morning's excitement while ensuring that Lily would not become overtired from excessive physical activity on their first full day in Denali National Park. At 1:15 p.m., while the family was gathered around their picnic table, consuming lunch and discussing their morning adventure, Stephen noticed movement near the tree line that bordered their camping loop, initially assuming that another camper was walking along one of the informal paths that connected various campsites, but gradually recognizing that the movement patterns were inconsistent with human pedestrian activity and might indicate wildlife presence in the campground area. Stephen's observation skills, sharpened by his morning wildlife encounter and his general awareness of environmental conditions, led him to focus more carefully on the movement while continuing his lunch conversation without alarming Rebecca or Lily, until he could determine the nature and significance of what he was observing. The movement resolved into a large, dark-colored animal moving deliberately through the trees in a path that appeared to be leading toward the camping area, though the intervening vegetation and shadows made immediate identification difficult despite Stephen's careful observation through his binoculars. The animal's size and movement patterns suggested a bear, though Stephen recognized that definitive identification would require clearer visual contact, and that his morning wildlife encounter might be influencing his interpretation of ambiguous visual information, leading him to continue observing while considering appropriate responses to various scenarios that might develop. At 1:22 p.m., the animal emerged partially into a clearing between campsites, allowing Stephen to identify it definitively as a grizzly bear of substantial size, larger than the bear they had observed at Horseshoe Lake and exhibiting behavior patterns that differed significantly from the peaceful foraging activities they had witnessed earlier. This bear appeared to be moving with purposeful direction rather than random foraging, and its posture suggested alertness and possible interest in the human activities and food sources associated with the campground environment, creating a potentially dangerous situation that required immediate implementation of emergency safety procedures. Stephen quietly alerted Rebecca and Lily to the bear's presence, while simultaneously beginning to implement the wildlife safety protocols that they had studied and discussed. Though the campground environment presented different challenges and options compared to their earlier trail encounter, where they had maintained significant distance from the wildlife and had clear escape routes available. The campground situation required different tactical considerations, including the protection of their campsite and RV, while ensuring family safety and coordinating with other campers who might also be at risk from the bear's presence in the developed area. Rebecca immediately understood the seriousness of the situation and began moving Lily toward the RV's entrance while maintaining calm demeanor to avoid creating panic or sudden movements that might attract the bear's attention to their specific location among the multiple campsites in their immediate area. Her nursing experience had included training in emergency situations that required rapid assessment and response, while maintaining patient calm and cooperation, skills that she now applied to managing her daughter's safety while supporting Stephen's efforts to monitor the bear's movements and determine appropriate family responses. The bear continued its movement through the campground area, approaching within approximately 100 yards of the Mitchell family's campsite, while investigating various locations where food scents might be detected, including garbage storage areas, picnic tables, and other campsites where families might have left food items exposed or improperly secured, according to park regulations. Stephen observed the bear's systematic investigation of potential food sources while calculating the time required for his family to reach safety within their RV and determining whether the bear's current trajectory would bring it into direct contact with their campsite. At 1:28 p.m., the bear's investigation pattern brought it to a campsite 3 spaces away from the Mitchell family's location, where it began examining a picnic table where another camping family had left food items exposed during their absence from the campsite, behavior that violated park regulations and created the exact type of situation that wildlife safety education was designed to prevent. The bear's interest in the food items confirmed Stephen's assessment that this encounter represented a more serious safety threat than their morning observation at Horseshoe Lake, since the bear was now exhibiting behavior specifically focused on human food sources and was operating within the confined environment of the campground where escape options were limited. Stephen made the critical decision to move his family into their RV immediately, recognizing that the bear's focus on food sources and its proximity to their campsite created unacceptable risk levels for remaining in the open area around their picnic table, even though their own food storage procedures had been properly implemented according to park regulations and should not be attracting the bear's attention to their specific location. The RV represented the strongest available shelter and would provide protection while they determined their next course of action and considered whether to alert park rangers about the bear's presence in the campground area. The family's movement toward their RV was conducted with the deliberate care that Stephen had learned from wilderness safety training, avoiding sudden movements or loud sounds that might attract the bear's attention, while ensuring that Lily remained calm and cooperative during the potentially dangerous situation. Rebecca supported Lily's movement while maintaining visual contact with Stephen, who continued monitoring the bear's activities and position to ensure that their movement to safety could be completed without creating additional hazards or complications. At 1:31 p.m., just as Stephen was opening the RV's entrance door to allow his family to enter their mobile shelter, the bear at the distant campsite succeeded in accessing the improperly stored food items and began consuming them with the rapid efficiency that characterized bear feeding behavior when human food sources were available. The bear's successful feeding created additional complications for the overall campground situation, since bears that obtained food rewards from human sources often returned to search for additional opportunities, potentially creating ongoing safety hazards for all campground visitors. Stephen closed and locked the RV door after his family had entered, then immediately moved to the RV's windows to continue observing the bear's activities while considering whether they should attempt to contact park rangers using their cell phone, though cellular service in the campground area was inconsistent and emergency communication might require using the park's landline telephone system located at the campground headquarters building approximately half a mile from their current location. The RV's interior provided psychological security while also offering multiple observation points for monitoring external conditions and assessing the developing situation. Rebecca organized emergency supplies within the RV while maintaining calm interaction with Lily, using her nursing skills to manage stress and anxiety while ensuring that their daughter understood the seriousness of their situation without becoming frightened or panicked by the proximity of dangerous wildlife. The RV's layout provided adequate space for extended occupancy if the bear's presence in the campground area required them to remain sheltered for an extended period while waiting for park rangers to respond and manage the wildlife safety situation. At 1:39 p.m., the bear completed its consumption of the accessible food items at the distant campsite and began moving in a search pattern that appeared designed to locate additional food sources within the campground area, bringing it progressively closer to the Mitchell family's location while investigating multiple campsites and potential food storage locations. Stephen tracked the bear's movement using his binoculars, while noting that its behavior had become more systematic and focused since obtaining its initial food reward, suggesting that the animal had learned to associate the campground environment with readily available human food sources. The bear's search pattern brought it to the campsite immediately adjacent to the Mitchell family's location at 1:44 p.m., where it began investigating the bear-proof storage container and picnic table area, with the thorough methodology that characterized experienced bears that had learned to exploit human food sources. Stephen observed the bear's investigation techniques, while noting that the adjacent campsite's occupants had properly secured their food supplies according to park regulations, though the bear's persistence in attempting to access the storage container demonstrated the determination that made grizzly bears particularly dangerous when they had learned to associate humans with food opportunities. The bear's investigation of the adjacent campsite continued for approximately 8 minutes, during which time it tested the bear-proof storage container's locking mechanism using both its claws and teeth, while also examining the picnic table and surrounding area for any food items or containers that might have been overlooked by the campsite's occupants. Stephen noted that the bear-proof storage system appeared to be functioning as designed, preventing the bear from accessing properly stored food, while also demonstrating the importance of strict compliance with food storage regulations in areas where dangerous wildlife was present. At 1:53 p.m., the bear concluded its investigation of the adjacent campsite without obtaining additional food rewards and began moving toward the Mitchell family's campsite, attracted either by scent evidence of their morning cooking activities or by the systematic search pattern that it was following through the campground area. Stephen alerted Rebecca and Lily that the bear was approaching their immediate area while continuing to observe its behavior and movement patterns to assess the level of threat that its presence represented to their safety and security. The bear's arrival at the Mitchell family's campsite occurred at 1:56 p.m. when it began investigating their bear-proof storage container, with the same systematic approach that it had used at previous locations, testing the container's security mechanisms while also examining their picnic table and the area around their RV for any accessible food sources. Stephen observed the bear's investigation from within the RV, while noting that their food storage procedures appeared to be preventing the bear from obtaining rewards that might encourage it to remain in their immediate area for extended periods. However, at 2:03 p.m., the bear's investigation expanded to include the RV itself, beginning with examination of the exterior storage compartments that Stephen had secured with heavy-duty locks according to his standard camping security procedures. The bear's interest in the RV represented a significant escalation in the threat level, since the vehicle contained their family's shelter and transportation, and any damage to the RV could compromise their safety and their ability to evacuate the area if conditions deteriorated further. Stephen watched with growing concern as the bear tested the RV's exterior storage compartment locks using its claws, demonstrating the problem-solving abilities that made grizzly bears particularly dangerous when they had learned to associate human equipment with food sources. The locks appeared to be holding against the bear's initial efforts, though Stephen recognized that the animal's persistence and strength could eventually overcome even heavy-duty security measures if it remained convinced that food sources were available within the RV's storage areas. At 2:07 p.m., the bear's investigation pattern brought it to the area directly beneath the RV's main living area, where it began examining the vehicle's undercarriage and external systems with the curiosity that characterized bears encountering unfamiliar objects in their territory. Stephen observed the bear's behavior while noting changes in the RV's stability as the large animal moved around and beneath their shelter, creating vibrations and movement that were clearly perceptible to the family members within the vehicle's interior. Rebecca maintained her position with Lily in the RV's rear bedroom area, using her nursing skills to keep their daughter calm while preparing emergency supplies that might be needed if their situation deteriorated to the point where evacuation from the RV became necessary. Her medical training had included disaster preparedness scenarios, though none had specifically addressed wilderness wildlife encounters, requiring her to adapt general emergency principles to their current unique and dangerous situation. The bear's investigation of the RV's undercarriage continued for approximately 12 minutes, during which time it appeared to be examining various mechanical components and external fittings, while also testing the vehicle's structural stability through pushing and pulling motions that created increasing concern for Stephen, who observed the animal's growing familiarity with their shelter and its apparent determination to access any food sources that might be stored within the vehicle's interior or exterior storage systems. At 2:21 p.m., the bear's behavior escalated dramatically when it began testing the RV's structural integrity by pushing against the vehicle's side panels with increasing force, causing the entire motorhome to rock noticeably and creating sounds of metal stress that suggested the possibility of structural damage if the bear continued its increasingly aggressive investigation. Stephen realized that their situation had deteriorated beyond the passive observation phase, and that immediate action was required to protect his family's safety before the bear's behavior resulted in compromise of their shelter or direct threat to their personal security. Stephen attempted to use his cell phone to contact park rangers, but discovered that cellular service remained unavailable from their current location within the RV, requiring him to consider alternative emergency communication methods while the bear continued its increasingly aggressive investigation of their vehicle. The lack of immediate communication with emergency services created additional stress, since help might not be available even if their situation deteriorated to the point where evacuation became necessary. At 2:26 p.m., the bear's investigation expanded to include attempts to access the RV through its entry door, beginning with examination of the door's exterior hardware and security mechanisms, while also pushing against the door frame with sufficient force to test the locking system's integrity. Stephen observed the bear's systematic approach to accessing the RV's interior, while recognizing that the vehicle's standard residential door and lock system had not been designed to withstand determined assault by a 400-pound predator equipped with powerful claws and problem-solving intelligence. The bear's efforts to access the RV's entry door continued for approximately 6 minutes, during which time it used both its claws and teeth to test various components of the door system, while also pushing and pulling against the doorframe with increasing force that created alarming sounds of structural stress. Stephen monitored the door's condition while preparing contingency plans for family evacuation through the RV's emergency window exits if the bear succeeded in compromising their primary shelter. Rebecca moved to the RV's front area to observe the bear's activities directly, while maintaining communication with Stephen about the animal's behavior and their assessment of threat levels, using her nursing experience with emergency situations to help maintain family coordination and decision-making capability during the increasingly dangerous encounter. Her position also allowed her to monitor alternative escape routes through the RV's various windows and emergency exits, while ensuring that Lily remained in the safest possible location within their compromised shelter. At 2:34 p.m., the bear's investigation pattern changed dramatically when it moved to the RV's rear area and began examining the vehicle's rear window and storage compartments with particular interest, suggesting that it had detected scent evidence of food sources in that location, despite Stephen's careful implementation of bear-proof storage procedures. The bear's focused interest in the RV's rear area created new concerns, since that location housed the family's sleeping quarters and contained many of their personal belongings that might include trace food scents, despite their storage precautions. Stephen's observation of the bear's behavior at the RV's rear revealed increasingly aggressive investigation techniques, including attempts to access the rear storage compartment through manipulation of its locking mechanism and examination of the rear window's security and structural integrity. The bear's systematic approach suggested previous experience with human vehicles and equipment, indicating that this might not be the animal's first encounter with campers and their mobile shelters, a possibility that significantly increased the danger level since experienced bears were known to be more persistent and successful in accessing human food sources. The bear's investigation of the RV's rear area intensified at 2:39 p.m. when it began using its claws to test the strength of the rear window's glass and frame, creating scratching sounds that were clearly audible to the family members within the vehicle, and visible scratches on the window surface that demonstrated the bear's potential for causing significant structural damage to their shelter. Stephen realized that the bear's behavior had escalated beyond investigation to active attempts to access the RV's interior, requiring immediate implementation of emergency evacuation procedures before the animal succeeded in compromising their shelter's integrity. However, before Stephen could initiate evacuation procedures, the bear's behavior escalated further at 2:42 p.m. when it began pushing against the RV's rear section with sufficient force to cause the entire vehicle to rock violently, creating instability that made movement within the RV dangerous for the family members, while also suggesting that the bear possessed sufficient strength to potentially overturn their mobile shelter if its aggressive behavior continued to intensify. Rebecca immediately moved Lily to the RV's most stable central area, while Stephen continued monitoring the bear's activities and assessing the structural integrity of their shelter under the increasing physical assault. The RV's rocking motion created additional psychological stress for all family members, while also making it difficult to maintain observation of the bear's activities and position, complicating their ability to make informed decisions about emergency response options. At 2:46 p.m., the bear's assault on the RV intensified dramatically when it began using its full body weight to push against the vehicle's side panels, creating unprecedented rocking motion that threatened to destabilize the RV's support systems and potentially cause the vehicle to overturn completely. Stephen recognized that their situation had become immediately life-threatening and that emergency evacuation was required before the bears' assault resulted in complete compromise of their shelter and direct physical threat to family members. Stephen shouted instructions to Rebecca and Lily to prepare for emergency evacuation through the RV's front entrance, while he moved to implement their escape plan. Though the violent rocking motion created by the bears' continued assault made coordinated movement within the vehicle extremely difficult and dangerous. The family's emergency evacuation would require precise timing to avoid exposure to the bear during their transition from the compromised shelter to alternative safety locations. However, at 2:48 p.m., before the family could implement their evacuation plan, the bears' assault achieved its apparent objective. When the combination of violent rocking motion and structural stress caused the RV's stabilizing jack system to fail completely, allowing the bears' continued pushing to begin overturning the entire vehicle with the Mitchell family trapped inside. Stephen realized that their situation had moved beyond emergency evacuation to immediate survival as their mobile home began the irreversible process of rolling over with his family inside the compromised structure. The RV's overturning process occurred with the terrifying inevitability of a major structural failure, beginning slowly as the bears pushing overcame the vehicle's balance point, but accelerating rapidly as gravity took control, and the 38-foot motorhome began rolling over onto its side with crushing force that would destroy much of the interior structure and create immediate life-threatening conditions for any occupants trapped within the rolling vehicle. Stephen's last clear memory before the impact was reaching toward Rebecca and Lily in a desperate attempt to protect them from the crushing forces that would result from their shelter's complete structural failure. The sound of the RV overturning could be heard throughout the Riley Creek campground area, attracting immediate attention from other campers and visitors who witnessed the unprecedented sight of a grizzly bear successfully overturning a large recreational vehicle with sufficient violence to suggest that occupants might be trapped within the destroyed structure. Multiple witnesses immediately began shouting for help while attempting to locate park rangers and emergency services, though the remote location and limited communication systems would delay professional emergency response for critical minutes, during which the Mitchell family's survival would depend entirely on immediate rescue efforts by civilian volunteers. The overturned RV came to rest on its side, with massive structural damage that had crushed much of the interior living space, while creating debris fields of broken glass, damaged furniture, and destroyed personal belongings that would complicate any rescue efforts to locate and extract family members who might be trapped within the wreckage. The bear, apparently satisfied that it had eliminated the obstacle that had prevented its access to potential food sources, began investigating the wreckage while rescue volunteers approached cautiously from distances that would allow them to assist trapped occupants without creating additional safety hazards through direct confrontation with the dangerous animal. Emergency response coordination began immediately as witnesses contacted park headquarters using various communication methods, including cell phones where service was available, personal radio systems carried by some camping enthusiasts, and direct travel to the campground headquarters building, where landline telephone service provided reliable contact with emergency services and park ranger stations throughout Denali National Park. The initial emergency reports described a family trapped within an overturned RV after a bear attack, though specific information about casualties and medical conditions would require direct assessment by rescue personnel who could safely approach the accident scene. Park Ranger Michael Thompson, a 15-year veteran of wilderness emergency response who was stationed at the Riley Creek area during the summer visitor season, received the initial emergency report at 2:54 p.m. and immediately began coordinating multiple response elements, including additional park rangers, medical personnel, and wildlife management specialists who would be required to safely manage both the human emergency and the dangerous bear that remained in the immediate vicinity of the accident scene. Thompson's experience with similar incidents had taught him that successful rescue operations required careful coordination between human rescue efforts and wildlife management to ensure that rescue personnel could operate safely while providing maximum assistance to trapped victims. The first rescue personnel to arrive at the scene were campers from nearby sites who had witnessed the RV overturning and immediately responded to provide whatever assistance might be possible, while professional emergency responders traveled to the remote location. These civilian volunteers included Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired emergency room physician from Seattle who was camping with her husband, and James Morrison, a paramedic from Anchorage who was visiting Denali during his vacation, providing immediate medical expertise that would be critical for assessing and treating any injuries discovered during rescue operations. Dr. Williams approached the overturned RV cautiously while maintaining awareness of the bear's position and behavior, using her medical training to assess the situation and determine the most effective approach for locating and assisting any survivors within the wreckage. Her initial assessment revealed that the RV's structural damage was extensive and that access to the interior would require careful entry through openings that had not been blocked by debris, while also considering the possibility that occupants might have suffered serious injuries from the crushing forces and impact trauma associated with the vehicle's violent overturning. The bear's continued presence at the accident scene created complex tactical challenges for rescue operations, since emergency personnel needed to approach close enough to assess and assist trapped occupants, while avoiding direct confrontation with a large predator that had already demonstrated aggressive behavior and territorial responses to human presence. Park Ranger Thompson coordinated with wildlife management specialists to develop strategies for temporarily deterring the bear from the immediate accident area without creating additional safety hazards for rescue personnel or potentially triggering more aggressive defensive behaviors from the animal. At 3:07 p.m., wildlife management personnel arrived with specialized equipment designed for managing dangerous bear encounters, including noise-making devices and chemical deterrents that could be used to encourage the bear to withdraw from the accident scene without creating additional trauma for any injured occupants of the overturned RV. The wildlife team's approach required careful coordination with rescue personnel to ensure that bear management activities did not interfere with medical assessment and treatment of human casualties, while also avoiding escalation of the bear's aggressive behavior. Dr. Williams succeeded in establishing voice contact with occupants of the overturned RV at 3:12 p.m., receiving responses that indicated at least one family member remained conscious and communicative within the wreckage, though assessment of injuries and overall condition would require direct visual and physical examination that could only be conducted after gaining safe access to the RV's interior. The voice contact provided crucial information about the number of occupants and their approximate locations within the wreckage, while also allowing rescue personnel to provide reassurance and instructions that might help survivors manage their situation until extraction could be completed. Rebecca Mitchell's voice was the first to be clearly identified by rescue personnel, indicating that she remained conscious and responsive, though trapped within the RV's damaged structure, in a position that prevented her from independently exiting the wreckage. Her nursing background enabled her to provide initial assessment information about her own condition and that of other family members, reporting that she was experiencing significant pain in her left leg and back, but remained alert and oriented, while also indicating that she could hear Stephen and Lily, but had not been able to establish clear communication with them due to debris and structural damage that separated the family members within the overturned vehicle. Paramedic Morrison coordinated with Dr. Williams to establish communication protocols and medical assessment procedures that could be implemented from outside the overturned RV, while rescue personnel worked to create safe access routes for more comprehensive evaluation and treatment of injured occupants. Morrison's emergency medical experience included multiple vehicle accident scenarios, though the combination of wilderness location, dangerous wildlife presence, and extensive structural damage created unique challenges that required adaptation of standard rescue procedures. The wildlife management team's efforts to deter the bear from the immediate accident scene achieved partial success at 3:18 p.m. when the animal moved approximately 50 yards away from the overturned RV, though it maintained visual contact with the rescue operations and continued to exhibit territorial behavior that suggested it might return to defend its perceived territory if rescue activities continued for extended periods. The bear's withdrawal provided rescue personnel with improved access to the accident scene, while requiring continued vigilance and coordination with wildlife specialists to prevent renewed aggressive contact during rescue operations. Stephen Mitchell's voice was identified by rescue personnel at 3:23 p.m., though his communication was significantly weaker than Rebecca's and indicated possible head injury or other serious medical condition that was affecting his consciousness and communication abilities. Stephen's responses to rescue personnel questions were inconsistent and confused, suggesting traumatic brain injury or other serious neurological effects from the violent impact and crushing forces experienced during the RV's overturning, requiring immediate medical assessment and treatment as soon as safe access to his location could be established. Lily Mitchell could not be reached through voice communication despite repeated attempts by rescue personnel and her parents, creating urgent concern about her condition and location within the wreckage. The absence of response from the 8-year-old child suggested either unconsciousness from serious injuries or entrapment in a location where communication was impossible due to debris or structural damage, requiring immediate physical search and rescue efforts as soon as safe entry to the RV could be accomplished without creating additional hazards for rescue personnel or trapped occupants. Emergency medical helicopter transport was requested at 3:29 p.m. to ensure rapid evacuation of seriously injured family members to advanced medical facilities in Anchorage, where trauma surgery and intensive care capabilities would be available for treating severe injuries associated with the crushing and impact forces experienced during the recreational vehicle accident. The helicopter response required coordination with air traffic management and weather services to ensure safe landing operations at the remote campground location, while also providing advanced life support medical equipment and personnel that would be essential for managing critical injuries during transport. Park Ranger Thompson coordinated the establishment of a secure perimeter around the accident scene that would allow rescue operations to proceed safely while maintaining protective distance from the bear that continued to patrol the area and monitor human activities with apparent territorial interest. The perimeter establishment required positioning of additional park rangers and volunteers at strategic locations where they could observe both rescue operations and bear behavior while being prepared to respond to any renewed aggressive contact between the dangerous animal and human rescue personnel. Dr. Williams succeeded in establishing safe entry to the overturned RV at 3:36 p.m. through a window opening that had been cleared of glass and debris by volunteer rescue workers, allowing her to begin direct medical assessment of family members while maintaining communication with external rescue coordination personnel. Her entry into the wreckage revealed extensive interior damage and difficult access conditions that would complicate medical treatment and evacuation procedures, requiring careful planning to safely extract injured occupants without causing additional injuries through rescue operations. Rebecca Mitchell was located in a position where she was trapped by debris from the RV's damaged interior structure, but appeared to have avoided the most severe crushing injuries, though her complaints of leg and back pain suggested possible fractures or spinal injuries that would require careful evaluation and stabilization before any movement or extraction attempts could be safely implemented. Dr. Williams began systematic medical assessment using emergency procedures adapted to the confined space and limited equipment availability while communicating her findings to external medical personnel who were preparing advanced treatment capabilities. Stephen Mitchell was found in a more seriously compromised position where he had apparently been struck by shifting debris during the RV's violent overturning, resulting in obvious head trauma with bleeding and altered consciousness that indicated serious traumatic brain injury requiring immediate advanced medical intervention. Dr. Williams's assessment revealed multiple injuries, including probable skull fracture and possible internal bleeding that would require emergency surgical treatment beyond the capabilities available at the remote accident scene, emphasizing the critical importance of rapid helicopter evacuation to advanced medical facilities. The search for Lily Mitchell within the wreckage required extensive debris removal and systematic exploration of areas where a small child might have been thrown or trapped during the violent overturning process, with rescue personnel working carefully to avoid causing additional structural collapse that might endanger trapped occupants or rescue workers operating within the unstable wreckage. The complexity of the search operation was increased by the RV's extensive interior damage and the presence of personal belongings and debris that obscured potential locations where Lily might be trapped. At 3:44 p.m., rescue personnel located Lily Mitchell in the RV's rear sleeping area where she had been trapped beneath damaged furniture and debris, with initial assessment revealing that she was unconscious and unresponsive to verbal and physical stimuli, indicating serious injuries that would require immediate advanced medical treatment. Dr. Williams's preliminary examination suggested multiple trauma, including possible head injury and internal injuries that were beyond the scope of field medical treatment available at the accident scene, requiring emergency evacuation to trauma surgery facilities. The medical helicopter arrived at Riley Creek Campground at 3:51 p.m., with advanced life support equipment and trauma medical personnel, including Dr. Sarah Chen, a trauma surgeon from Providence, Alaska Medical Center who specialized in emergency wilderness rescue operations and had extensive experience treating injuries associated with vehicle accidents and wildlife encounters. Dr. Chen's arrival provided advanced medical capabilities that would be essential for stabilizing and treating the severe injuries that had been identified among the Mitchell family members during initial rescue assessment. Emergency medical treatment began immediately upon Dr. Chen's arrival, focusing on stabilization of life-threatening injuries while preparing family members for helicopter evacuation to advanced medical facilities where comprehensive trauma surgery and intensive care treatment would be available. The treatment priorities were established based on severity of injuries and likelihood of survival, with Stephen's traumatic brain injury and Lily's unconscious condition requiring immediate attention, while Rebecca's injuries appeared more stable, though still requiring professional medical evaluation and treatment. Stephen Mitchell's condition deteriorated rapidly during emergency medical treatment, with Dr. Chen's assessment revealing extensive brain trauma and internal bleeding that indicated injuries beyond the survival capabilities available even with immediate helicopter evacuation to advanced trauma facilities. Despite aggressive medical intervention, including advanced life support measures and preparation for emergency surgery, Stephen's vital signs continued to decline, suggesting that the severe trauma sustained during the RV overturning had caused irreversible damage to critical biological systems. Lily Mitchell's condition also proved to be beyond the capabilities of emergency medical intervention, with Dr. Chen's examination revealing multiple severe injuries, including traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding, that had progressed to the point where survival was unlikely despite immediate evacuation to advanced medical facilities. The 8-year-old child's injuries appeared to have resulted from the crushing forces and violent impact experienced when the recreational vehicle overturned, with the family trapped inside the mobile structure. Rebecca Mitchell remained conscious and responsive throughout the emergency medical treatment process, though her injuries included suspected spinal fractures and internal injuries that would require comprehensive evaluation and treatment at advanced medical facilities. Her nursing background enabled her to understand the severity of her family's situation and provide information to medical personnel about the circumstances of their accident, while also requesting information about her husband and daughter's condition, despite her own serious injuries. At 4:17 p.m., Dr. Chen made the difficult determination that Stephen Mitchell's injuries were incompatible with survival, despite all available emergency medical interventions, and pronounced him deceased at the accident scene while continuing emergency treatment efforts for Rebecca and Lily Mitchell, who were prepared for immediate helicopter evacuation to trauma surgery facilities in Anchorage. Stephen's death was attributed to severe traumatic brain injury with associated internal bleeding that had resulted from the crushing and impact forces experienced during the recreational vehicle accident. Lily Mitchell was evacuated by emergency medical helicopter at 4:23 p.m. in critical condition, with life-threatening injuries that included traumatic brain injury and multiple internal injuries, requiring immediate surgical intervention at advanced trauma facilities equipped with pediatric intensive care capabilities. Despite the rapid response and advanced medical treatment available during helicopter transport, her condition remained extremely critical, with survival dependent upon immediate access to neurosurgical and trauma surgery capabilities at Providence, Alaska Medical Center. Rebecca Mitchell was evacuated by a second emergency medical helicopter at 4:31 p.m. with serious but potentially survivable injuries that included spinal fractures and internal injuries requiring comprehensive evaluation and treatment at advanced medical facilities, though her condition was considered more stable than that of other family members, and her survival prognosis was significantly better given the nature and severity of her trauma. Her evacuation was delayed until after Lily's departure due to the critical nature of the child's condition and the limited helicopter capacity available for simultaneous transport of multiple critical patients. The bear that had caused the Mitchell family tragedy remained in the campground area throughout the rescue operations, requiring continued wildlife management efforts to ensure that it did not interfere with emergency medical procedures or create additional safety hazards for rescue personnel and other campground visitors. Wildlife management personnel determined that the bear's aggressive behavior and successful association of human campsites with food sources created ongoing public safety hazards that would require immediate management action to prevent additional incidents. Park Ranger Thompson coordinated with Alaska Department of Fish and Game wildlife management specialists to implement emergency protocols for managing dangerous wildlife that had demonstrated aggressive behavior toward humans and had successfully overcome human safety measures, including the possibility of immediate euthanasia if the bear could not be safely relocated to remote areas where it would not encounter additional human visitors. The decision-making process involved multiple factors including public safety, wildlife conservation principles, and practical management capabilities, given the remote location and limited resources available for large animal relocation operations. At 5:42 p.m., Lily Mitchell was pronounced dead upon arrival at Providence, Alaska Medical Center, despite immediate implementation of advanced trauma surgery and pediatric intensive care procedures, with her death attributed to severe traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding that had proven incompatible with survival despite all available medical interventions. The 8-year-old child's death marked the second family fatality resulting from the recreational vehicle accident that had occurred when the grizzly bear successfully overturned their mobile home with the family trapped inside. Rebecca Mitchell underwent emergency surgery at Providence, Alaska Medical Center beginning at 6:15 p.m. to address spinal fractures and internal injuries sustained during the recreational vehicle accident, with surgical procedures conducted by Dr. Michael Rodriguez, an orthopedic trauma specialist, and Dr. Lisa Park, a general surgeon specializing in trauma operations. The surgical team's assessment revealed extensive injuries that would require multiple operations and extended rehabilitation, though Rebecca's survival prognosis remained favorable given the nature of her trauma and her overall physical condition prior to the accident. The grizzly bear responsible for the Mitchell family tragedy was located and euthanized by Alaska Department of Fish and Game personnel at 7:23 p.m. after determination that the animal's aggressive behavior and demonstrated ability to overcome human safety measures created unacceptable ongoing risks to public safety that could not be adequately managed through relocation or other non-lethal interventions. The decision to euthanize the bear was made in accordance with established protocols for managing wildlife that had caused human fatalities and had demonstrated persistent aggressive behavior toward humans in developed areas. News of the Mitchell family tragedy reached national media outlets by 8:30 p.m. on June 28, 2024. With initial reports describing the unprecedented incident of a grizzly bear successfully overturning a recreational vehicle and causing multiple human fatalities within a national park campground, leading to widespread coverage of wilderness safety issues and questions about the adequacy of current safety protocols for protecting visitors to areas where dangerous wildlife was present. The media coverage included interviews with wildlife management experts and park officials who provided information about bear behavior and safety procedures while addressing public concerns about the risks associated with wilderness recreation activities. The investigation into the Mitchell family incident was initiated immediately by multiple agencies, including the National Park Service, Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and local law enforcement authorities who would examine all aspects of the tragedy to determine contributing factors and identify potential improvements to safety procedures and public education programs designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. The investigation would include examination of the recreational vehicle's condition and equipment, analysis of the bear's behavior and possible motivations, and review of campground management procedures and visitor safety education programs. Rebecca Mitchell's condition stabilized following emergency surgery, though her recovery would require extended hospitalization and rehabilitation to address the spinal injuries and other trauma sustained during the accident, while also requiring psychological counseling and support services to help her process the traumatic loss of her husband and daughter in the wilderness accident that had destroyed her family during what was intended to be their vacation adventure of a lifetime. Her survival made her the sole witness to the events that had led to the tragedy, and the only person who could provide investigators with first-hand information about the bear's behavior and the family's responses during the critical minutes leading up to the recreational vehicle accident. The Riley Creek campground was temporarily closed following the Mitchell family incident to allow for comprehensive safety assessment and implementation of enhanced bear management procedures designed to prevent similar encounters between dangerous wildlife and camping families, with reopening dependent upon completion of safety improvements and enhanced visitor education programs that would better prepare families for the realities of wilderness camping in areas where large predators were present. The campground closure affected hundreds of visitors who had planned Alaska vacation experiences similar to the Mitchell family's tragic adventure. Dr. Williams and paramedic Morrison, the civilian volunteers who had provided initial emergency medical response at the accident scene, were recognized by park officials and emergency services agencies for their professional response and life-saving efforts that had provided critical medical care during the first minutes following the recreational vehicle accident, when professional emergency services were not yet available at the remote location. Their voluntary service demonstrated the importance of trained medical personnel being present in wilderness areas where emergency response times were extended due to geographic isolation and limited infrastructure. The bear autopsy conducted by Alaska Department of Fish and Game wildlife biologists revealed that the animal was a mature male grizzly bear weighing 487 pounds and estimated to be approximately 12 years old, with examination of stomach contents indicating recent consumption of human food items that confirmed the bear had successfully obtained food rewards from campground sources prior to its encounter with the Mitchell family. The autopsy findings supported the conclusion that the bear's aggressive behavior had been motivated by learned associations between human campsites and readily available food sources, emphasizing the critical importance of strict compliance with food storage regulations in bear habitat areas. Memorial services for Stephen and Lily Mitchell were conducted in Denver, Colorado on July 8, 2024, with attendance by hundreds of friends, family members, colleagues and community members who had been affected by the tragic news of the wilderness accident that had claimed 2 lives during what was intended to be a family adventure celebrating Lily's completion of 2nd grade and Stephen's engineering career success. The memorial services included tributes to Stephen's professional contributions and community involvement, along with remembrances of Lily's enthusiasm for learning and her excitement about experiencing Alaska's wilderness areas. Rebecca Mitchell's recovery process extended through multiple surgical procedures and months of physical rehabilitation, with her medical team addressing both the physical trauma of her spinal injuries and the psychological impact of surviving a wilderness accident that had claimed the lives of her husband and daughter while she was helpless to protect them. Her recovery was supported by comprehensive counseling services and support groups for survivors of traumatic wildlife encounters, though the psychological impact of her losses would require ongoing treatment and support for years following the incident. The National Park Service implemented enhanced bear management procedures at Denali National Park following investigation of the Mitchell family incident, including increased ranger patrols in campground areas, enhanced visitor education programs emphasizing bear safety procedures, and improved enforcement of food storage regulations designed to prevent bears from obtaining human food rewards that could lead to aggressive behavior and dangerous encounters with park visitors. The enhanced procedures were designed to reduce the probability of similar incidents while maintaining visitor access to wilderness recreation opportunities. Alaska Department of Fish and Game revised its wildlife management protocols for bears that had obtained human food sources, implementing more aggressive intervention procedures designed to prevent bears from developing learned behaviors that associated human developments with readily available food sources, while also enhancing public education programs that emphasized the critical importance of proper food storage and waste management in areas where dangerous wildlife was present. The protocol revisions were informed by analysis of the Mitchell family incident and similar wildlife encounters that had occurred in Alaska and other wilderness areas. The recreational vehicle industry responded to the Mitchell family incident by reviewing safety standards for vehicles used in wilderness areas where dangerous wildlife encounters were possible, though investigators determined that the Mitchell family's recreational vehicle had met all applicable safety standards and that no reasonable vehicle design could have withstood the forces applied by a 487-pound grizzly bear that was determined to access potential food sources within the vehicle. The industry response included enhanced consumer education about wilderness camping safety and recommendations for additional security measures in areas where dangerous wildlife was present. Legal proceedings related to the Mitchell family incident included a comprehensive investigation by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, examining whether campground operators and park management agencies had provided adequate safety protection for visitors, though the investigation concluded that existing safety protocols were appropriate and that the incident resulted from an extremely rare combination of circumstances involving an unusually aggressive bear and the failure of safety equipment to withstand forces beyond its design specifications. No legal liability was assigned to any agency or organization in connection with the tragedy. Rebecca Mitchell established the Stephen and Lily Mitchell Memorial Foundation in 2025 to promote wilderness safety education and support families affected by wildlife encounters, using her experience as a survivor of the Denali incident to advocate for enhanced safety procedures and public awareness of the risks associated with wilderness recreation activities in areas where dangerous wildlife was present. The Foundation's work included supporting research into wildlife behavior and human-wildlife interaction patterns that could inform improved safety protocols for wilderness visitors. The psychological impact of the Mitchell family tragedy extended beyond the immediate family to include rescue personnel, park rangers, and campground visitors who had witnessed or participated in the emergency response efforts, with many requiring counseling and support services to process the traumatic experience of responding to a wildlife attack that had resulted in multiple fatalities. The incident served as a reminder of the emotional toll that wilderness emergencies imposed on professional responders and civilian volunteers who provided emergency assistance in remote locations. Wildlife management experts used the Mitchell family incident as a case study for understanding grizzly bear behavior and the factors that could lead to aggressive encounters with humans, contributing to ongoing research into predator behavior patterns and the effectiveness of various deterrent and management strategies designed to reduce the probability of dangerous wildlife encounters in areas where humans and large predators coexisted. The research applications of the incident helped inform wildlife management practices throughout North America. The media coverage of the Mitchell family tragedy continued for months following the initial incident, with documentary film crews and journalists examining various aspects of the story, including wilderness safety, wildlife management, family outdoor recreation, and the psychological impact of traumatic loss in wilderness settings. The extensive media attention brought national focus to issues related to wildlife management and public safety in national parks and wilderness areas, leading to policy discussions at federal and state levels. Educational institutions incorporated the Mitchell family incident into wilderness safety curricula and outdoor recreation programs, using the tragedy as a teaching example of the importance of proper safety procedures and emergency preparedness in wilderness environments where dangerous wildlife was present. The educational applications helped ensure that future wilderness visitors would benefit from the lessons learned through the Mitchell family's tragic experience, potentially preventing similar incidents through enhanced safety awareness and preparation. The long-term impact of the Mitchell family incident on Denali National Park included permanent changes to campground management procedures, visitor education programs, and wildlife management protocols that were designed to prevent similar tragedies while maintaining public access to wilderness recreation opportunities. The changes represented a comprehensive response to the lessons learned from the incident and demonstrated the Park Service's commitment to visitor safety while preserving the wilderness experience that attracted families like the Mitchells to Alaska's national parks. Rebecca Mitchell's ongoing recovery and advocacy work served as a testament to human resilience in the face of traumatic loss, while also providing ongoing reminders of the importance of wilderness safety and the need for continued vigilance in areas where humans and dangerous wildlife coexisted. Her survival and subsequent dedication to preventing similar tragedies honored the memory of Stephen and Lily Mitchell while contributing to improved safety for future wilderness visitors who sought to experience the natural wonders that had attracted the Mitchell family to Denali National Park during the summer of 2024. The next stories: grizzly bear, attacks, 2 police officers outside Montana Station. September 16, 2025. The morning air in Bozeman, Montana carried the crisp promise of autumn as Officer Daniel Brooks pulled into the police department parking lot at precisely 5:47 a.m. At 41 years old, Daniel had seen enough in his 18 years with the Bozeman Police Department to know that September could bring unexpected challenges. The tourists were beginning to thin out, but the wildlife was becoming more active as they prepared for winter hibernation. He'd grown up in these mountains, the son of a park ranger who'd taught him to read the signs that most city folks missed entirely. Daniel stepped out of his patrol car, a 2023 Ford Police Interceptor that still smelled faintly of new leather and disinfectant. The parking lot stretched behind the modern brick building that housed the Bozeman Police Department, situated on the northwestern edge of town where the urban sprawl began to give way to rolling hills and dense pine forests. The Bridger Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow that caught the pale morning light. As he gathered his equipment from the trunk, Daniel's mind wandered to his daughter Emma, who was starting her senior year at Montana State University just across town. She'd been texting him about her wildlife biology classes, fascinated by the same natural world that had shaped his childhood. His wife, Sarah, often joked that their family dinner conversations sounded like episodes of National Geographic, with Daniel sharing stories from his patrol beats and Emma contributing facts from her coursework. The radio crackled to life on his belt. "All units, be advised we've received multiple calls regarding bear sightings in the residential areas north of Main Street. Garbage day was yesterday, and it appears we have at least one adult grizzly that's been investigating overturned containers. Animal control is en route, but exercise extreme caution in the affected areas." Daniel nodded to himself. It was exactly what he'd expected. September was prime time for human-bear conflicts in southwestern Montana. The bears were in hyperphagia, the period of intense feeding before winter hibernation, when they could consume up to 20,000 calories per day. A single garbage can filled with food scraps represented an easy meal worth thousands of calories, and once a bear discovered such a reliable food source, they often returned repeatedly. The heavy glass doors of the police station opened with a pneumatic hiss, and Officer Stephanie Hayes emerged, adjusting her duty belt and pulling on her jacket. At 29, Stephanie was relatively new to Montana, having transferred from the Portland Police Bureau just 8 months earlier. She'd grown up in urban Oregon and was still adapting to the realities of policing in bear country. Her short auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and her sharp green eyes held the alertness of someone who took her job seriously. "Morning, Brooks," she called out, her breath visible in the cool air. "Did you catch that bear advisory?" I was just reading through the wildlife encounter protocols again, still getting used to the idea that a domestic disturbance call might involve a 700-pound grizzly. Daniel chuckled, remembering his own learning curve when he'd first started patrol. "You'll get the hang of it. The key is thinking like they do. Bears are incredibly intelligent and have excellent memories. If they find food somewhere once, they'll come back. And this time of year, they're absolutely desperate to pack on weight before winter." Stephanie nodded, pulling out her smartphone to check the weather forecast. "Looks like we're getting a warm front today. High of 68 degrees. Doesn't that make them more active?" "Exactly right," Daniel replied, impressed by her quick grasp of the situation. "Cooler weather usually keeps them moving at dawn and dusk, but warm days can extend their activity periods. Plus, the warmer it gets, the more those garbage cans are going to smell like a bear buffet." The two officers began their routine equipment check, a process Daniel had performed thousands of times but never took for granted. His Glock 22.40 caliber service weapon was properly holstered, magazines fully loaded. His taser, pepper spray, handcuffs, and radio were all in their designated positions on his duty belt. But in bear country, standard police equipment felt almost inadequate. The department had issued bear spray to all officers, a specialized pepper spray designed specifically for large predators. But Daniel knew that even the most powerful bear spray had limitations. Stephanie was running through her own checklist when her radio chirped with an incoming call. "Unit 23, respond to 1247 Aspen Ridge Drive for a bear in garbage situation. Homeowner reports a large grizzly has been in their driveway for the past hour and refuses to leave." "That's my call," Stephanie said, keying her radio. "Unit 23 responding to Aspen Ridge Drive bear situation." She looked at Daniel with a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Want to tag along? I could use someone with more experience for this one." Daniel was about to respond when his own radio activated. "Unit 15, welfare check requested at 892 Pine Creek Road. Elderly resident missed her morning check-in call with her daughter. House is isolated, approximately 2 miles north of town." "Unit 15 en route to Pine Creek Road," Daniel replied automatically. He turned to Stephanie with an apologetic shrug. "Rain check on the bear call. Mrs. Patterson is probably just sleeping in, but her daughter worries when she doesn't answer the phone by 6 a.m. sharp." As the two officers prepared to head to their respective patrol cars, neither could have imagined that their paths would converge in less than 4 hours in a way that would change both their lives forever. The morning sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the parking lot, and somewhere in the hills surrounding Bozeman, a large male grizzly bear was beginning to stir from his resting place beneath a cluster of lodgepole pines. The bear, later identified by wildlife biologists as a 600-pound adult male, designated as bear number 341 in the state's monitoring database, had been tracked intermittently for the past 3 years. Radio collar data showed he typically maintained a territory spanning roughly 300 square miles, ranging from the Bridger Mountains down into the valleys where human development was gradually encroaching on traditional bear habitat. He was known to be bold around humans, a trait that had gotten him into trouble before. 2 years earlier, bear number 341 had been trapped and relocated after breaking into a hunting cabin near Big Sky Resort. The previous spring, he'd been spotted multiple times in residential areas, earning him the attention of Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks officials who'd been monitoring his movements with increasing concern. Each human encounter seemed to reduce his natural fear response, a dangerous progression that wildlife managers knew often ended in tragedy. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a wildlife biologist with the state agency, had been tracking bear number 341's GPS collar data from her office in Helena when she noticed an alarming pattern. For the past week, the bear's movements had been concentrating in an increasingly tight circle around the northern outskirts of Bozeman. His nighttime positions indicated he was spending considerable time in areas with high human activity, and his movement patterns suggested he was actively seeking food sources rather than simply passing through. At 6:15 a.m., Dr. Martinez was reviewing the overnight data when she noticed that bear number 341's collar had transmitted its last position at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, placing him less than a mile from the Bozeman city limits. She immediately picked up her phone to call the local wildlife office, but the line was busy. Unknown to Dr. Martinez, the local wildlife officers were already responding to multiple bear reports from the night before. Meanwhile, Officer Stephanie Hayes was navigating her patrol car through the winding streets of the Aspen Ridge neighborhood, an upscale development that had been carved into the hillside just north of town. The houses here were large and modern, with expansive decks and manicured lawns that provided stunning views of the surrounding mountains. It was exactly the type of development that created ideal conditions for human-bear conflicts. As Stephanie turned onto Aspen Ridge Drive, she could see a small crowd of neighbors gathered at a safe distance from house number 1247. A silver-haired man in a bathrobe was gesturing animatedly toward his driveway, where an overturned garbage can lay scattered across the pavement. The homeowner, James Mitchell, was a retired aerospace engineer who'd moved to Montana 5 years earlier, seeking what he called the peaceful mountain lifestyle. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," Mitchell called out as Stephanie approached. "That bear has been in my driveway for over an hour. Every time I try to go out and clean up the mess, it comes back out of the trees. It's enormous, easily the biggest bear I've ever seen." Stephanie nodded, scanning the tree line that bordered Mitchell's property. The house sat on a 2-acre lot that backed up to national forest land, providing an easy corridor for wildlife to move between the wilderness and residential areas. "Can you show me exactly where you last saw the bear, Mr. Mitchell?" "Right there, behind that cluster of aspens." Mitchell pointed toward a grove of trees, about 50 yards from his house. "It keeps coming out, looking around, then going back into the trees. I think it's waiting for us to leave so it can come back to the garbage." This was textbook bear behavior, and Stephanie felt her training kicking in. Bears were creatures of habit, and once they'd identified a food source, they would often linger in the area for hours or even days. The key was to eliminate the attractant and encourage the bear to move on naturally rather than creating a confrontational situation that could escalate quickly. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to need you and your neighbors to go inside and stay there while I assess the situation," Stephanie said, her voice calm but authoritative. "Bears are typically more afraid of us than we are of them, but this time of year they can be unpredictable." Now, as the neighbors reluctantly dispersed to their homes, Stephanie returned to her patrol car and radioed for backup. "Dispatch, Unit 23 at the Aspen Ridge Drive bear situation. I have a large grizzly that appears to be established in a residential area. Requesting animal control and possibly fish and wildlife response." The dispatcher's voice crackled back through the radio. "Unit 23. Animal Control is currently responding to 2 other bear calls. Estimated time of arrival for your location is 45 minutes. Fish and Wildlife has been notified, but no ETA available." Stephanie felt a knot form in her stomach. 45 minutes was a long time to keep a bear contained in a residential neighborhood, especially during the morning hours when people would be leaving for work and children would be waiting for school buses. She'd studied the protocols extensively, but facing her first real bear situation alone was more intimidating than she'd anticipated. She decided to try a passive approach first, using her patrol car's PA system to create noise that might encourage the bear to move on naturally. As she reached for the microphone, movement in her peripheral vision caught her attention. A large, dark shape was emerging from the tree line, moving with the distinctive rolling gait of a grizzly bear. Bear number 341 stood nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder as he walked on all fours, his massive frame rippling with muscle beneath his thick chocolate-brown coat. His head was enormous, easily twice the size of a black bear's, with small, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings. A distinctive silver streak ran along his back, a marking that would later help wildlife officials confirm his identity. The bear paused at the edge of the driveway, sniffing the air with obvious interest. His nose, thousands of times more sensitive than a human's, was processing a complex array of scents: the spilled garbage, the fear sweat of the humans who'd been nearby, the diesel exhaust from Stephanie's patrol car, and dozens of other odors that painted a detailed picture of the situation. Stephanie felt her heart rate spike as she watched the massive animal through her windshield. All her training had emphasized that bears typically avoided human contact, but bear number 341 seemed completely unbothered by her presence. If anything, his body language suggested curiosity rather than fear, a dangerous sign that indicated this particular bear had lost much of his natural wariness around humans. She reached for her radio again, keeping her voice low. "Dispatch, Unit 23. The bear is visible and appears very comfortable around humans. This animal may be habituated. I strongly recommend we expedite animal control response. Copy Unit 23. Be advised, we're also getting reports of a possible bear sighting near the elementary school on Maple Street. Animal control is spread thin this morning." As if sensing the radio conversation, bear number 341 lifted his massive head and looked directly at Stephanie's patrol car. For a moment, that felt like an eternity. Bear and human regarded each other across 30 yards of suburban driveway. The bear's expression was unreadable, but Stephanie could see intelligence in those dark eyes, an awareness that was both fascinating and terrifying. Then, without warning, the bear began walking directly toward her patrol car. 6 miles away, Officer Daniel Brooks was just finishing his welfare check on elderly Mrs. Patterson, who had indeed simply overslept and was embarrassed by all the fuss her worried daughter had caused. The 78-year-old widow lived alone in a small cabin that had been her home for over 40 years, back when the area had been truly rural. Now, suburban development was creeping steadily northward, bringing the inevitable conflicts between human expansion and wildlife habitat. "I'm sorry for the trouble, Officer Brooks," Mrs. Patterson said as she walked him to his patrol car. "Margaret worries too much since her father passed. She thinks I can't take care of myself up here alone." Daniel smiled reassuringly. "No trouble at all, Mrs. Patterson. Your daughter loves you and wants to make sure you're safe. These mountains can be unpredictable, especially this time of year with the bears being so active." Mrs. Patterson nodded knowingly. "Oh, I've been dealing with bears longer than you've been alive, young man. Had one in my garden just last week, big fellow. Must have been 6 feet tall when he stood up. He was after my apple tree. I just banged some pots together until he wandered off." Daniel's expression grew serious. "Mrs. Patterson, you need to be much more careful than that. Bears are in hyperphagia right now, which means they're actively seeking food and can be much more aggressive than usual. If you see another bear, please call us immediately instead of trying to scare it off yourself." As he drove back toward town, Daniel's radio began buzzing with activity. Multiple bear sightings were being reported across the northern sections of Bozeman, and it was becoming clear that the morning was going to be dominated by wildlife encounters. His radio crackled, with Stephanie's voice requesting expedited animal control backup, and he made a mental note to check on her progress once he cleared his current call. The sun was climbing higher now, approaching the 8 a.m. hour when the city would truly come alive. School buses would begin their routes, commuters would emerge from their homes, and the likelihood of dangerous human-bear encounters would increase exponentially. Daniel felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with policing a community where nature and civilization existed in such close proximity. Back at the Aspen Ridge development, Stephanie was facing a deteriorating situation. Bear number 341 had approached to within 15 yards of her patrol car and was now actively investigating the vehicle with obvious curiosity. He walked around the car slowly, sniffing at the tires and bumper, occasionally rising up on his hind legs to peer through the windows. Stephanie remained perfectly still, her hand resting on her radio, but not daring to make any sudden movements that might startle the massive animal. Through her windshield, she could see neighbors peering out from behind curtains, some taking photographs or videos with their phones. The surreal nature of the situation struck her. Here she was, a police officer trained to handle human threats, essentially trapped in her patrol car by a wild animal in the middle of a suburban neighborhood. The bear completed his circuit of the patrol car and then did something that made Stephanie's blood run cold. He sat down on his haunches directly in front of her vehicle, as if settling in for a long stay. This wasn't typical bear behavior at all. Most bears, even those that had lost some fear of humans, would investigate briefly and then move on. Bear number 341 appeared to be claiming the territory. Her radio crackled with dispatch traffic about other bear sightings, and Stephanie realized that Bozeman was experiencing what wildlife officials would later classify as a multi-bear event, a situation where several different bears had simultaneously converged on human-populated areas. Such events were rare but not unprecedented, typically occurring when natural food sources were scarce and weather conditions drove bears to seek alternative food sources. At 8:15 a.m., Dr. Rebecca Martinez finally reached the Bozeman Wildlife Office and spoke with Officer Tom Hendricks, a veteran wildlife specialist who'd been dealing with bear conflicts for over 15 years. When Dr. Martinez described bear number 341's recent movement patterns and his history of human encounters, Hendricks felt a chill of recognition. "That's the big male we've been tracking," Hendricks told Dr. Martinez. "He's been getting bolder each year, and we've been debating whether he needs to be relocated again or if we're past that point. A bear his size, with his history, if he's actively seeking human contact." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. Once a bear became truly habituated to humans and began associating people with food sources, relocation often failed. Such bears typically either returned to their original territory or simply created the same problems in their new location. The alternative was a decision that wildlife managers dreaded, but sometimes had to make. "Tom, I've got his last GPS location from late last night, and he was moving toward the Bozeman city limits," Dr. Martinez continued. "If he's the bear that's been hitting garbage cans all morning, we need to get teams out there immediately." Hendricks was already reaching for his keys. "I'm heading out now." "We've got at least 3 separate bear situations in progress this morning, and if one of them is 341, this could get very serious very quickly." Meanwhile, Stephanie was discovering just how serious the situation had become. Bear number 341 had remained seated in front of her patrol car for nearly 20 minutes, occasionally standing to investigate different parts of the vehicle, but always returning to his position directly in her path. Her radio traffic indicated that animal control was still tied up with other calls, and the situation was beginning to feel like a standoff. She decided to attempt a gentle escalation, using her patrol car's lights and siren to encourage the bear to move on. She activated the emergency lights first, watching bear number 341's reaction carefully. The bear looked up at the flashing red and blue lights with what appeared to be mild interest, but showed no signs of fear or intention to leave. Next, she tried a brief blast of the siren. The loud electronic wail echoed off the surrounding houses, and several neighbors appeared at their windows to see what was happening. Bear number 341 stood up at the sound, his ears forward and alert, but again showed no sign of being intimidated. If anything, the noise seemed to have made him more attentive to the patrol car. This was troubling behavior that suggested the bear had not only lost his fear of humans, but might actually be seeking interaction with them. Stephanie had read about such cases in her training materials, but seeing it firsthand was deeply unsettling. A bear that actively approached humans was unpredictable and potentially extremely dangerous. Her radio crackled with Daniel's voice. "Unit 23, this is Unit 15. I'm clear from my welfare check and can provide backup if you need it. What's your status?" Stephanie keyed her radio, grateful to hear a friendly voice. "Unit 15. I have a large adult grizzly that's been investigating my patrol car for about 25 minutes. The animal appears completely unafraid of humans and has positioned itself directly in front of my vehicle. I'm effectively trapped until animal control arrives." "Copy that. Unit 23. I'm about 10 minutes from your location. Do not attempt to exit your vehicle or take any action that might provoke the animal. I'll approach from the eastern access road and assess the situation." As Daniel navigated toward the Aspen Ridge development, his mind was racing through bear encounter protocols and contingency plans. He dealt with dozens of bear situations over his career, but Stephanie's description suggested this was different. A bear that actively approached and lingered around humans was exhibiting predatory behavior, and such bears were extremely dangerous. He thought about the equipment available to them. Both officers carried bear spray, but its effectiveness was limited by wind conditions and required close proximity to the animal. Their service weapons were capable of stopping a bear, but only with precise shot placement, and the suburban setting made the use of firearms extremely risky. The safest approach would be to maintain distance and wait for specialized wildlife personnel with tranquilizer equipment. But as Daniel turned onto Aspen Ridge Drive, he could see that the situation was more complex than he'd anticipated. Bear number 341 was no longer sitting in front of Stephanie's patrol car. Instead, the massive grizzly was walking slowly through the neighborhood, investigating cars parked in driveways and sniffing around garbage containers with methodical thoroughness. Daniel parked his patrol car at a safe distance and observed the bear's behavior through binoculars. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't a bear that had wandered into town by accident or been attracted by a single food source. Bear number 341 was systematically exploring the neighborhood as if he belonged there, showing no concern for the multiple human dwellings surrounding him. "Unit 23, I'm on scene," Daniel radioed to Stephanie. "The bear has moved away from your vehicle and is currently investigating the neighborhood. This animal is exhibiting extremely bold behavior. We need to establish a perimeter and evacuate any residents who might be in immediate danger." Stephanie's voice came back tense but professional. "Copy, Unit 15. I can see him from my position. He's been completely unafraid of lights, sirens, or the patrol car. This isn't normal bear behavior." Daniel was about to respond when his attention was drawn to movement at the far end of the street. A yellow school bus was turning onto Aspen Ridge Drive, following its normal route to pick up children for the morning commute. The driver, 54-year-old Maria Santos, was unaware of the bear situation and was proceeding at normal speed toward a designated stop where 3 children were waiting. "Oh no," Daniel muttered, grabbing his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 15. We have a school bus entering the area where we have an active bear situation. Need immediate contact with transportation dispatch to redirect the bus. But even as he spoke, Daniel could see that events were moving too quickly for normal protocols. Bear number 341 had noticed the approaching school bus and was moving toward it with obvious interest. The large yellow vehicle represented something new and different in his territory, and his body language suggested he was preparing to investigate. The three children waiting at the bus stop were 8-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan Rodriguez, and their 10-year-old neighbor, Casey Mitchell, whose grandfather, James, had first called police about the bear that morning. The children had no idea that a 600-pound grizzly bear was less than 100 yards away and approaching their location. Daniel made a split-second decision that would later be scrutinized by internal affairs investigators, wildlife officials, and media commentators. Rather than waiting for backup or following standard containment protocols, he activated his emergency lights and drove directly toward the school bus, hoping to intercept and warn the driver before she reached the children. As his patrol car accelerated down Aspen Ridge Drive, Daniel's radio exploded with chatter. Stephanie was reporting the bear's movement toward the bus stop. Dispatch was trying to coordinate with school transportation, and in the background he could hear the first calls coming in from other parts of town, where additional bear sightings were being reported. The school bus driver, Maria Santos, had been driving the same route for 12 years and knew every child, every stop, and every potential hazard along the way. But as she approached the Rodriguez twins bus stop, she was focused on the road ahead and didn't immediately notice the flashing police lights in her rearview mirror or the large brown shape moving through the trees parallel to the street. Casey Mitchell saw the bear first. The 10-year-old was an avid nature enthusiast who'd been reading about wildlife since he could hold a book, and he recognized immediately that the large animal emerging from the trees was not a dog or any other domestic animal. "Emma! Ethan! There's a bear!" he shouted, grabbing the younger children and pulling them away from the bus stop. The twins looked where Casey was pointing and saw bear number 341 stepping fully into the open, now less than 50 yards away. The massive grizzly's attention was fixed on the approaching school bus, but his path would take him directly through the area where the children had been standing moments before. Maria Santos heard the children shouting and looked up just as Daniel's patrol car pulled alongside her bus, lights flashing, and officer gesturing frantically for her to stop. Through her side window, she could see Officer Brooks pointing toward the trees, and when she followed his gaze, she saw the largest bear she'd ever encountered standing in the middle of the suburban street. Training and maternal instinct kicked in simultaneously. Maria hit her brakes, activated her emergency flashes, and immediately radioed her dispatch. "Transportation Control, Bus 47. I have an emergency stop on Aspen Ridge Drive. There is a large bear in the street between my bus and my pickup point. I need immediate assistance and guidance." The children, meanwhile, had run toward the nearest house, which happened to be the Mitchell residence, where James Mitchell was watching the unfolding drama from his front window. The elderly engineer threw open his front door and called for the children to come inside, his voice tight with fear as he saw the enormous bear now standing in full view in the middle of the street. Bear number 341 had stopped his advance and was assessing the changed situation. The school bus represented something entirely new in his experience, a large, brightly colored object that made unfamiliar sounds and smells. His natural curiosity warred with a growing sense of territorial challenge as more humans appeared in what he had begun to consider his domain. Daniel parked his patrol car between the bear and the school bus, creating a barrier while he assessed options. The bear was now approximately 30 yards from both the bus and his patrol car, close enough that any sudden movement could trigger an aggressive response. He keyed his radio, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Dispatch Unit 15. We have a critical situation on Aspen Ridge Drive. Large grizzly bear has positioned itself between a school bus and residential area with children present. The bear is showing no fear response and appears to be claiming territory. I need immediate response from animal control with tranquilizer capability and evacuation protocols for the surrounding area. The dispatcher's voice came back crisp and professional. Copy Unit 15. Animal control is en route with ETA of 15 minutes. Fish and Wildlife has been notified and is responding with specialized equipment. Are you able to maintain current position safely? Daniel looked at the massive bear standing in the middle of the suburban street and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. 15 minutes was an eternity when dealing with an unpredictable wild animal, especially one that was exhibiting such unusual behavior. But moving too quickly could trigger the very confrontation they were trying to avoid. Affirmative, dispatch. We'll maintain positions and monitor the situation, but be advised this animal is not responding to normal deterrent methods. We may be dealing with a bear that's become habituated to human contact. As if to emphasize Daniel's point, bear number 341 began walking again, but instead of moving away from the human activity, he approached Daniel's patrol car with obvious interest. The bear's massive head swayed from side to side as he walked, his sensitive nose processing the complex array of scents surrounding the situation. Stephanie, who had been monitoring the situation from her position further up the street, decided to try a coordinated approach. Unit 15, I'm going to attempt to create a distraction from the eastern side while you maintain your position. Maybe we can encourage the bear to move back toward the tree line. Negative, Unit 23, Daniel replied immediately. Do not approach or attempt any intervention. This bear is not behaving predictably, and we can't risk escalating the situation with children in the area. But even as he spoke, Daniel could see that bear number 341 was making the tactical decisions for them. The massive grizzly had completed his investigation of Daniel's patrol car and was now turning his attention toward the school bus. Maria Santos was sitting behind the wheel of the large yellow vehicle, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she watched the enormous bear approaching her bus. The bear walked with the confident gait of an animal that had no natural predators and had lost his instinctive fear of humans. As he drew closer to the school bus, he rose up on his hind legs, bringing his full height to nearly 8 feet as he investigated this strange new object that had appeared in his territory. Maria Santos had never been so close to a wild bear, and the sight of the massive animal standing upright beside her bus was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. She could see the individual hairs in his thick coat, the massive claws that could tear through metal, and the intelligent eyes that seemed to be studying her as intently as she was studying him. "Transportation Control, this is Bus 47, she radioed, her voice remarkably steady. The bear is now directly beside my bus and has stood up on its hind legs. It appears to be investigating the vehicle. I can see police officers in the area, but I need guidance on whether I should remain stationary or attempt to move." The transportation dispatcher, who was receiving real-time updates from police dispatch, responded immediately. "Bus 47, maintain your current position. Do not start your engine or make any sudden movements. Police and wildlife officials are en route. Your safety and the safety of any students is the top priority." Transportation Control, I have no students on board. The children at my pickup point were evacuated to a nearby residence before I arrived. I'm alone on the bus. This information was immediately relayed to the police dispatchers, who felt a small measure of relief that no children were directly threatened. But the situation remained extremely dangerous, with a large predator showing unusual aggression in a populated area. Bear number 341 completed his investigation of the school bus and dropped back down to all fours. But instead of moving away, he began what wildlife experts would later recognize as territorial behavior, walking in a large circle around the bus and patrol car as if establishing the boundaries of his claimed area. Daniel watched this behavior with growing concern. In his years of experience with bears, he'd never seen anything quite like this. Most bears, even those that had become comfortable around humans, maintained some level of wariness. Bear number 341 was displaying behavior more typical of a dominant male establishing territory, which suggested he had completely lost his fear of humans and was beginning to see them as either potential threats to be challenged or potential sources of food. The radio traffic was becoming intense as more units were dispatched to the scene and wildlife officials coordinated their response. Daniel could hear discussions about tranquilizer protocols, backup lethal force authorization, and evacuation procedures for the surrounding neighborhood. The situation had escalated from a routine bear call to a major incident requiring specialized response. At 8:47 a.m., Officer Tom Hendricks from Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks arrived at the scene with a tranquilizer rifle and 2 decades of experience dealing with problem bears. As he assessed the situation from a safe distance, his expression grew increasingly grim. Bear number 341's behavior was textbook for a bear that had become not just habituated to humans, but actively aggressive around them. "This is not good," Hendricks murmured into his radio as he spoke with his supervisor back at headquarters. "We've got a large adult male grizzly exhibiting territorial behavior in a residential area. The animal is not responding to normal deterrent methods and appears to have lost all fear of humans. Based on his collar data and behavior patterns, this is likely Bear 341, and we may be looking at our worst-case scenario." The supervisor's voice came back heavy with the weight of difficult decisions. "Tom, if this is 341 and he's showing predatory behavior around humans, you know what the protocols recommend. Public safety has to be the priority." Hendricks nodded grimly. He'd been hoping to never face this situation, but bear number 341's behavior was making the choice for them. A bear that actively challenged humans in their own environment was too dangerous to relocate or attempt to rehabilitate. The only question now was whether they could safely tranquilize the animal or if more immediate action would be required. As Hendricks was setting up his tranquilizer equipment, the situation took another dangerous turn. Bear number 341 had completed several circuits around the school bus and patrol car and was now approaching the Mitchell residence where the 3 children had taken shelter. James Mitchell watched through his front window as the massive bear walked up his driveway with the casual confidence of a homeowner returning from work. "Oh God, he's coming toward the house," Mitchell whispered into his phone as he spoke with the 911 dispatcher. "The kids are here with me, but this bear is walking right up to my front door." Daniel saw the bear's movement toward the house and felt his heart rate spike. The children were no longer in immediate physical danger, but bear number 341's behavior was becoming increasingly unpredictable and aggressive. The bear was systematically investigating every element of human presence in the area, and his body language suggested growing confidence rather than natural wariness. "Wildlife officer on scene, this is Unit 15, Daniel radioed to Hendricks. "The bear is now approaching a residence with children inside. We may need to consider immediate intervention." Hendricks responded quickly. "Copy that, Unit 15. I have tranquilizer capability, but I need the bear to be stationary for at least 30 seconds for a safe shot. The drug takes 5 to 10 minutes to take effect, so if we attempt tranquilization, we need to be prepared for the bear to potentially become more aggressive before becoming sedated." This was the nightmare scenario that wildlife officials trained for but hoped never to face. A tranquilized bear could become unpredictably aggressive as the drugs took effect, and in a residential area with civilians nearby, the risks were enormous. but allowing the bear to continue his territorial behavior was equally dangerous. Bear number 341 had reached the Mitchell front porch and was sniffing around the door with obvious interest. Inside the house, James Mitchell had moved the three children to an interior bathroom and was barricading the door with furniture, his hands shaking as he tried to remain calm for the sake of the terrified kids. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Officer Brooks," Daniel's voice came through the 911 dispatcher to Mitchell's phone. "We have wildlife officers on scene, but I need you to keep the children away from windows and doors. Make noise if the bear attempts to enter the house, but do not go outside under any circumstances." Mitchell's voice was tight with fear as he responded. "Officer, this bear is enormous, and he's not acting like any bear I've ever seen. He's not afraid of anything. What if he tries to break into the house?" It was a legitimate concern. Grizzly bears possessed enormous strength and could easily break through most residential doors or windows if motivated to do so. The fact that bear number 341 was actively investigating human dwellings rather than being deterred by them suggested he had crossed a dangerous threshold in his relationship with human environments. Stephanie, who had been maintaining her position further up the street, radioed with an observation that chilled everyone listening. "I can see the bear from my location, and it appears to be testing the front door with its paws. This animal is actively trying to access the human dwelling. This behavior crossed every line that wildlife managers use to distinguish between manageable and dangerous bears. A bear that actively attempted to enter human homes was exhibiting predatory behavior and posed an immediate threat to public safety. The decision that Tom Hendricks had been hoping to avoid was being made for him by bear number 341's own actions. "All units, this is Wildlife Officer Hendricks," came the grim voice over the radio. "Based on the animal's behavior, I am authorizing lethal force if the bear attempts to enter the residence or poses an immediate threat to civilians. This animal has demonstrated predatory behavior and cannot be safely managed through normal protocols." The authorization hung heavy in the air as all responders realized the situation had moved beyond wildlife management into active threat response. Daniel felt the familiar weight of his service weapon and found himself hoping desperately that the tranquilizer option would still prove viable. Bear number 341, as if sensing the increased tension among the humans surrounding him, stood up on his hind legs again and looked directly at Daniel's patrol car. For a long moment, bear and human made eye contact across 30 yards of suburban driveway, and Daniel saw something in those dark eyes that made his blood run cold. There was no fear, no uncertainty, no natural wariness that should characterize a wild animal's interaction with humans. There was only calm assessment and what appeared to be calculation. The bear dropped back to all fours and began walking directly toward Daniel's patrol car. At 9:03 a.m., the situation reached its critical moment. Bear number 341 was approaching Daniel's patrol car with obvious intent, showing none of the hesitation or fear that wildlife officers hope to see in such situations. Tom Hendricks had his tranquilizer rifle ready, but the bear's movement made a clean shot impossible without risking hitting the patrol car or nearby houses. "Unit 15, the bear is moving directly toward your position," Stephanie radioed from her vantage point. "Be prepared to exit the area immediately if he becomes aggressive." Daniel's hand moved instinctively to his service weapon as he watched 600 pounds of grizzly bear approaching his vehicle with what could only be described as predatory intent. His training had covered bear encounters extensively, but most scenarios assumed the bear would maintain some level of natural fear. Bear number 341 was rewriting those assumptions with every step. The massive grizzly reached Daniel's patrol car and immediately began the same investigative behavior he had shown earlier, but with more intensity. He pushed against the vehicle with his massive shoulder, testing its stability. The patrol car rocked slightly under the bear's weight, and Daniel felt a surge of adrenaline as he realized how easily the animal could overturn the vehicle if he chose to do so. "Wildlife, I need that tranquilizer shot now," Daniel radioed, his voice tight with controlled tension. "This bear is actively challenging my position and showing zero fear response." Hendricks moved to get a better angle, but bear number 341's position against the patrol car made any shot extremely risky. "Unit 15, I can't get a clean shot with the bear against your vehicle. Can you move to give me a clear field of fire?" Daniel assessed his options quickly. Starting the patrol car engine might startle the bear and cause an aggressive reaction, but remaining stationary while the animal grew bolder was equally dangerous. He decided on a measured approach, starting the engine and activating his emergency lights in hopes of encouraging the bear to move away. The sound of the engine starting got bear number 341's immediate attention. The bear stepped back from the patrol car and stared directly through the windshield at Daniel. For a moment that felt like hours, human and bear regarded each other at close range, and Daniel could see the intelligence and lack of fear in the animal's expression that made him so dangerous. Then, bear number 341 did something that no one had anticipated. Instead of being deterred by the running vehicle, he reared up on his hind legs and placed his massive front paws on the hood of the patrol car, his face now only inches from the windshield. The bear's enormous claws scraped against the metal hood as he supported his weight, and his dark eyes stared directly into Daniel's. "Jesus Christ," Daniel muttered, keying his radio with hands that were remarkably steady despite the circumstances. "The bear is on top of my patrol car. I repeat, the bear has climbed onto my vehicle and is making direct eye contact. This animal is showing zero fear and appears to be challenging me directly." Stephanie's voice came back immediately. "Unit 15, can you safely exit your vehicle?" Daniel looked at the massive bear, whose face was filling his windshield, and made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. "Negative, Unit 23. Any movement might trigger an attack. I'm going to try to wait this out." But bear number 341 had other plans. The massive grizzly began pushing down on the hood of the patrol car with his full weight, causing the vehicle's suspension to compress and the front end to dip dramatically. Daniel could hear the metal creaking under the strain and realized that the bear was actively trying to access the interior of the vehicle. "Wildlife officer, I need immediate intervention," Daniel radioed, his voice now carrying real urgency. "This bear is attempting to breach my vehicle. Authorization requested for lethal force if necessary." Tom Hendricks had moved to within 40 yards and finally had a clear shot at bear number 341's exposed flank. The tranquilizer rifle held a dose calculated for a bear of this size, but the animal's aggressive behavior made the timing critical. If the bear became more aggressive during the 5 to 10 minutes it would take for the drugs to take effect, the situation could become catastrophic. "Taking the shot," Hendricks announced over the radio. "All units be advised. Bear will be tranquilized, but may become more aggressive before becoming sedated. Maintain safe distance and be prepared for emergency response." The tranquilizer dart struck bear number 341 in the shoulder with a soft thud that was audible even over the patrol car's engine. The bear immediately spun around, looking for the source of the sudden pain, his massive claws scraping across the hood of Daniel's patrol car as he turned. For a moment, everyone held their breath, hoping the bear would simply leave the area and find a place to rest while the tranquilizer took effect. But bear number 341's reaction was exactly what wildlife officials had feared most. Instead of retreating, the bear became visibly agitated, turning in circles and making huffing sounds that indicated rising aggression. "All units, the bear has been darted, but is showing increased agitation," Hendricks radioed urgently. "This animal may become more dangerous before the drugs take effect. Everyone maintain maximum distance." Bear number 341's attention returned to Daniel's patrol car, but now his body language had changed from curious investigation to obvious aggression. The bear began pushing against the vehicle with increasing force, rocking it back and forth as Daniel gripped the steering wheel and tried to remain calm. The windshield began to spiderweb under the pressure of the bear's weight, and Daniel realized he was facing a potentially life-threatening situation. The tranquilizer was working its way through bear number 341's system, but the bear's size meant it would take time to become effective, and his agitation was making him increasingly dangerous. "Unit 15, your windshield is failing," Stephanie observed from her position. "Be prepared to evacuate your vehicle if necessary." Daniel's mind raced through his options. Exiting the patrol car would put him in direct contact with an agitated 600-pound grizzly bear, but remaining in the vehicle might result in being trapped if the bear succeeded in breaching the windshield or overturning the car entirely. Bear number 341 made the decision for him. The massive grizzly suddenly reared up and brought both front paws down on the windshield with tremendous force. The safety glass held, but developed a massive crack that ran from top to bottom, and Daniel could see the bear's claws had punctured through in several places. "I'm evacuating the vehicle," Daniel announced over the radio, his hand moving to his door handle. "Cover me." But as Daniel prepared to exit his patrol car, bear number 341 demonstrated the intelligence that made him so dangerous. The bear moved around to the driver's side of the vehicle and positioned himself directly beside the door, effectively trapping Daniel inside. The standoff that followed would be analyzed by wildlife experts, law enforcement officials, and psychologists for years to come. Bear number 341, despite being under the influence of tranquilizer drugs, had successfully cornered a human law enforcement officer and was displaying behavior that went far beyond normal bear territorial responses. "Unit 15, do not exit your vehicle," came Hendricks' urgent voice over the radio. "The bear is positioned to intercept you." We need to wait for the tranquilizer to take more effect. But waiting was becoming increasingly dangerous as bear number 341's agitation continued to escalate. The bear began striking the side of the patrol car with his paws, each blow rocking the vehicle and adding new dents to the door panels. Daniel could hear the metal buckling under the assault and knew that his protective barrier was failing. At 9:17 a.m., 14 minutes after the tranquilizer dart had been administered, bear number 341 suddenly stopped his assault on the patrol car and stood perfectly still. For a moment, hope flickered among the responding officers that the drugs were finally taking effect. But instead of showing signs of sedation, the bear turned and began walking with purposeful determination toward the Mitchell residence where the children were sheltering. "The bear is moving toward the house with the kids," Stephanie radioed urgently. "The tranquilizer doesn't appear to be working as expected." This was every wildlife officer's worst nightmare. A bear that was agitated by tranquilizer drugs, but not sufficiently sedated to be rendered harmless. Bear number 341's size and apparent resistance to the drugs meant that normal dosage calculations were proving inadequate, and his continued aggressive behavior posed an immediate threat to civilian lives. Tom Hendricks made the decision that he'd been hoping to avoid throughout his entire career. "All units, I am authorizing immediate lethal force. This animal poses an immediate threat to civilian lives and is not responding to tranquilization. Unit 15, do you have a clear shot?" Daniel looked through his damaged windshield at bear number 341's retreating form and felt the weight of the moment. Everything in his training and personal beliefs rebelled against the idea of killing a wild animal, especially one whose aggressive behavior might be the result of human encroachment on his natural habitat. But the safety of 3 children outweighed every other consideration. "Affirmative. I have a clear shot," Daniel replied, drawing his service weapon and rolling down his passenger window. "But be advised, my position may not allow for an immediately lethal shot. We may need coordinated fire." Stephanie was already moving to a better position. "Unit 23 moving to support position. I'll have a secondary angle in 30 seconds. Bear number 341 had reached the Mitchell front porch and was again testing the door with his massive paws. Inside the house, James Mitchell held his breath as he heard the sounds of the enormous animal just feet away from where he and the children were hiding. The 3 kids, 8-year-old twins Emma and Ethan Rodriguez and 10-year-old Casey Mitchell, huddled together in the interior bathroom while the adults tried to remain calm. Casey, with his love of nature documentaries, understood better than the adults how dangerous their situation had become. "Mr. Mitchell," Casey whispered, "bears can break down doors if they really want to, and this one doesn't seem afraid of anything." Mitchell nodded grimly, his phone still connected to the 911 dispatcher who was providing real-time updates from the officers outside. "They know, son. The police are right outside, and they're going to make sure we're safe." But outside, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Bear number 341 had begun pushing against the front door with increasing force, and the sound of splintering wood indicated that the barrier wouldn't hold much longer. The bear's behavior had moved far beyond territorial posturing into active predatory aggression. "Wildlife officer, the bear is actively attempting to breach the residence," Daniel radioed, as he aimed his service weapon through his patrol car window. "I'm taking the shot." The first gunshot echoed across the suburban neighborhood at 9:23 a.m., followed immediately by a second shot from Stephanie's position. Both officers were experienced marksmen, but shooting at a moving target the size of bear number 341 while ensuring the safety of nearby civilians required precision under extreme pressure. The first bullet struck bear number 341 in the shoulder, spinning him around and causing him to roar in pain and fury. The second shot missed entirely, striking the Mitchell house's front porch railing. The wounded bear, now in a state of pain-fueled rage, turned toward the source of the gunfire and charged directly at Daniel's patrol car. "Bear is charging my position," Daniel radioed tersely, maintaining his aim as 600 pounds of wounded grizzly bear covered the distance between the house and his vehicle in seconds. Multiple shots fired. Bear number 341's charge was a terrifying display of raw power and speed. Despite his wound, the massive grizzly moved with surprising agility, covering ground in bounding leaps that brought him to Daniel's patrol car in under 5 seconds. Daniel fired 3 more shots through his side window, at least one of which found its target, but the bear's momentum carried him directly into the side of the patrol car. The impact was tremendous. Bear number 341's full weight struck the passenger side of the patrol car, causing the vehicle to rock violently and pushing it several feet sideways. Daniel felt the impact through the entire vehicle and found himself thrown against the driver's side door as the patrol car tilted up on 2 wheels for a terrifying moment before crashing back down. Stephanie had repositioned herself with a clear line of sight and fired 4 rapid shots as bear number 341 grappled with the patrol car. Her marksmanship training proved effective under the extreme stress of the situation, and at least 2 of her shots struck the bear center mass. But bear number 341's size and adrenaline kept him on his feet, despite multiple gunshot wounds. The massive grizzly clawed at the patrol car's passenger side, his enormous claws raking across the metal door panels and shattering the remaining windows. Daniel found himself face to face with the wounded animal through the destroyed passenger window, so close he could smell the bear's breath and see the rage in his dark eyes. "Officer down! Officer down!" Stephanie screamed into her radio as she watched bear number 341's claws reach through the passenger window toward Daniel. "Unit 15 is under direct attack. All units respond immediately." Daniel pressed himself against the driver's side door and fired his remaining shots at point-blank range into bear number 341's massive head and neck. The .40 caliber rounds finally found vital targets, and the bear's aggressive movements began to slow as catastrophic injuries took their toll. Bear number 341 made one final attempt to reach Daniel through the destroyed window, his massive paw sweeping across the interior of the patrol car and missing Daniel's head by inches. Then, with a sound that would haunt Daniel's dreams for years to come, the enormous bear collapsed against the side of the patrol car and slid to the ground. The sudden silence that followed the gunfire was almost as shocking as the violence that had preceded it. Daniel sat in his destroyed patrol car, his ears ringing from the gunshots and his hands shaking from adrenaline as he processed what had just occurred. Through his shattered windshield, he could see Stephanie approaching cautiously, her weapon still drawn and trained on bear number 341's motionless form. "Unit 15, respond," Stephanie called out as she moved closer to the patrol car. "Daniel, are you injured?" Daniel took a quick inventory of himself and found that while he was shaken and had several small cuts from flying glass, he had avoided serious injury. "I'm okay," he called back, his voice hoarse from shouting over the gunfire. "Is the bear down?" Tom Hendricks approached from his position with his rifle ready, maintaining a safe distance as he assessed bear number 341's condition. Even with multiple gunshot wounds, a bear of this size could potentially survive and remain dangerous for several minutes. "The bear appears to be down, but everyone maintain distance until I can confirm he's deceased." The next few minutes passed in careful assessment as Hendricks approached the fallen grizzly and confirmed that bear number 341 was indeed dead. The massive bear had succumbed to multiple gunshot wounds, finally ending a confrontation that had lasted over an hour and pushed multiple people to the absolute limits of their training and courage. "All units, this is Wildlife Officer Hendricks," came the official confirmation over the radio. "The bear has been confirmed deceased. The immediate threat has been eliminated. Begin standard post-incident protocols." As the initial adrenaline began to fade, the full scope of what had occurred started to become clear. A 600-pound grizzly bear had invaded a suburban neighborhood, exhibited unprecedented aggressive behavior toward humans, and ultimately had to be killed in a firefight that destroyed a police vehicle and came within inches of claiming human lives. James Mitchell emerged from his house with the 3 children, all of whom were shaken but unharmed. The kids stared in amazement at the enormous bear lying beside Daniel's destroyed patrol car, their young minds struggling to process the reality of what they had just survived. "Is everyone okay?" Mitchell asked as he approached the officers, his voice still trembling from the stress of the encounter. "Those kids were so brave. They never panicked, not even when we could hear the bear trying to get through the door." Daniel climbed out of his patrol car on unsteady legs, surveying the damage to his vehicle and marveling at how close the encounter had come to ending in tragedy. The patrol car's passenger side was completely destroyed, with deep claw marks running from the roof to the ground, and every window on that side shattered. The bear's claws had penetrated through the door panels in several places, and bear hair was caught in the jagged metal edges. "The children showed incredible courage," Daniel replied, his professional training helping him maintain composure despite the magnitude of what had just occurred. but we need to get everyone checked out by paramedics and begin the investigation process. Emergency medical services had been standing by during the incident and immediately moved in to assess everyone involved. Daniel and Stephanie were both evaluated for shock and minor injuries, while the 3 children were examined more thoroughly to ensure they hadn't suffered any psychological trauma that might require immediate intervention. Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead paramedic on scene, had dealt with numerous wildlife encounters during her 8 years with Bozeman Emergency Services, but nothing quite like this. Officer Brooks, you're going to need several stitches for those glass cuts, and I want you evaluated for possible concussion symptoms from the impact when the bear hit your vehicle, she told Daniel as she cleaned his wounds. Officer Hayes, you appear to be physically unharmed, but I'm recommending psychological support for both of you, given the traumatic nature of this incident. As the medical evaluations continued, the scene began to fill with additional personnel. Detective Mark Sullivan from the Bozeman Police Department arrived to begin the officer-involved shooting investigation, while Dr. Rebecca Martinez drove down from Helena to examine bear number 341's remains and try to understand what had driven the animal to such unprecedented aggressive behavior. The media began arriving shortly after 10:30 a.m., drawn by reports of gunfire and emergency radio traffic in a residential neighborhood. News vans from local television stations set up outside the police perimeter, and reporters began interviewing neighbors who had witnessed portions of the encounter. Rebecca Thompson, a reporter for KBZK-TV, was among the first journalists on scene. As she surveyed the aftermath of the encounter, she realized this was far more than a typical bear story. This is Rebecca Thompson reporting from the Aspen Ridge development in Bozeman, where just over an hour ago, a massive grizzly bear was killed by police officers after it attacked a patrol car and attempted to break into a home with children inside. The destruction here is unlike anything we've seen from a wildlife encounter in our area. Dr. Martinez's examination of bear number 341's remains would later provide crucial insights into the incident. The bear showed signs of excellent physical condition despite his advanced age, estimated at approximately 15 years old. His teeth were in good condition, indicating he had been successfully finding natural food sources, which made his aggressive behavior toward humans even more puzzling. This wasn't a starving bear acting out of desperation, Dr. Martinez explained to the assembled investigators. Bear 341 was in prime physical condition. His aggressive behavior appears to have been behavioral rather than driven by physical need. This is extremely unusual and concerning from a wildlife management perspective. The GPS collar data from bear number 341's tracking device told a troubling story. Over the past month, his movements had shown an increasing focus on human-populated areas, with less and less time spent in traditional wilderness habitats. The pattern suggested a bear that had not only lost his fear of humans, but had begun actively seeking human contact. What we're seeing here is the end result of a process that probably took several years, Dr. Martinez continued. Each successful interaction with human food sources reduced this bear's natural wariness. Eventually, he crossed the line from being a bear that tolerated human presence to one that actively sought it out. Once a bear reaches that point, relocation rarely works, and the animal becomes genuinely dangerous. Detective Sullivan's investigation would eventually span 3 weeks and involve interviews with dozens of witnesses, analysis of multiple videos taken by neighbors, and coordination with wildlife officials from 3 different agencies. The shooting was ultimately ruled justified, with both Daniel and Stephanie commended for their restraint and professionalism under extreme circumstances. These officers showed remarkable judgment and courage, Detective Sullivan told the media at a press conference 3 days after the incident. They exhausted every possible alternative before resorting to lethal force, and their actions undoubtedly saved lives. The bear's behavior was so unprecedented that our standard protocols proved inadequate for the situation. The incident sparked a broader conversation about human-wildlife conflict in rapidly growing communities like Bozeman. Wildlife officials used the tragedy as an opportunity to educate the public about the importance of secure garbage storage, the dangers of feeding wildlife, and the need for increased vigilance as human development continued to expand into traditional wildlife habitats. Maria Santos, the school bus driver who had been trapped during the incident, became an unexpected spokesperson for wildlife safety education. "I grew up in Montana, but I never imagined anything like this could happen," she told a community meeting 2 weeks after the incident. "We all need to understand that these animals are incredibly powerful and intelligent, and when they lose their fear of humans, everyone is at risk." The 3 children who had sheltered in the Mitchell house were enrolled in counseling services, though all 3 showed remarkable resilience in dealing with their experience. Casey Mitchell, the 10-year-old who had first spotted the bear, actually used the incident to deepen his interest in wildlife biology, though his parents made sure he understood the difference between observing animals safely and the dangerous encounter they had survived. "Casey keeps asking when he can become a wildlife biologist," his grandfather James Mitchell told reporters. "We're supporting his interest, but we're also making sure he understands how dangerous wild animals can be when they're not behaving normally." The Mitchell residence required extensive repairs to the front door and porch, and James Mitchell installed a sophisticated security system that included motion detectors and cameras specifically designed to detect large animals. Many other residents in the Aspen Ridge development followed suit, creating an informal early warning network for future wildlife encounters. Officer Daniel Brooks returned to duty after a week of administrative leave, but the incident had changed his perspective on policing in bear country. He worked with department training officers to develop new protocols for wildlife encounters based on lessons learned from the Bear number 341 incident. "We learned that our assumptions about bear behavior were based on normal bears," Daniel explained to a training session of new officers 6 months after the incident. "When you encounter a bear that's lost its natural fear of humans, everything changes. The animal becomes unpredictable and potentially extremely dangerous, and you have to be prepared to escalate your response much more quickly than we traditionally taught." Officer Stephanie Hayes took a different path following the incident. While she remained with the Bozeman Police Department, she also began working closely with Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks to develop better coordination protocols between law enforcement and wildlife officials. Her experience as a newer officer who had faced such an extreme situation brought valuable perspective to training programs. "I learned that all the classroom training in the world can't fully prepare you for the reality of facing a dangerous wild animal," Stephanie told a conference of Western law enforcement officers 8 months after the incident. "But having solid protocols and good communication with wildlife experts can make the difference between a successful outcome and a tragedy." The Aspen Ridge incident became a case study that was examined by wildlife management agencies across North America. The combination of Bear number 341's behavioral escalation, the suburban setting, and the presence of children created a perfect storm that challenged every assumption about how such encounters should be managed. Dr. Martinez published a comprehensive analysis of the incident in the Journal of Wildlife Management, focusing on the factors that had led to Bear number 341's unprecedented aggressive behavior. Her research identified several key elements that had contributed to the bear's dangerous habituation to humans. First, this bear had multiple successful encounters with human food sources over a period of several years, Dr. Martinez wrote. Second, He was never subjected to negative consequences that might have reinforced his natural fear response. Third, his territory overlapped significantly with expanding human development, creating numerous opportunities for conflict. Finally, his individual personality appeared to be naturally bold and curious, traits that became dangerous when combined with habituation. The research led to new recommendations for wildlife management in areas experiencing rapid human population growth. These included more aggressive intervention protocols for bears showing early signs of habituation, improved coordination between wildlife agencies and local law enforcement, and stronger enforcement of regulations regarding attractants like unsecured garbage and bird feeders. 1 year after the incident, the Bozeman Police Department hosted a memorial service for bear number 341, acknowledging both the tragedy of having to kill such a magnificent animal and the necessity of protecting human lives. The service drew wildlife officials, law enforcement officers, and community members who had been affected by the incident. This bear was a victim of our success in creating attractive communities that encroach on wildlife habitat, said Police Chief Jennifer Walsh at the memorial service. Our goal is to learn from this tragedy and develop better ways to coexist with the wildlife that makes Montana such a special place. The memorial also honored the professionalism and courage shown by Officers Brooks and Hayes, who had faced an unprecedented situation with remarkable skill and judgment. Both officers were awarded the department's Medal of Valor for their actions during the incident. The Aspen Ridge development itself changed significantly following the bear number 341 incident. The Homeowners Association implemented strict new regulations regarding garbage storage, landscaping that might attract wildlife, and reporting protocols for animal sightings. They also funded the installation of wildlife corridors that would allow animals to move through the area without coming into direct contact with human dwellings. We realized that we had created a community right in the middle of wildlife habitat without really thinking through the implications, said Sandra Chen, the development's Homeowners Association president. Now, we're trying to find ways to coexist more safely and responsibly. The school district also implemented new protocols for dealing with wildlife encounters during bus routes. Drivers received additional training on wildlife behavior, and new communication systems were installed to allow rapid coordination with police and wildlife officials when animals were spotted near schools or bus stops. Transportation Supervisor Mike Rodriguez, father of twins Emma and Ethan, who had been involved in the incident, became a strong advocate for wildlife safety education. Our kids need to understand that they live in one of the most beautiful places on Earth, but that beauty comes with responsibility and awareness, he told a school board meeting. We can't protect them from every possibility, but we can teach them to be smart and prepared. The long-term psychological impact of the incident varied among those involved. Officer Daniel Brooks found that he had become more cautious and observant during patrol duties, constantly scanning for signs of wildlife activity. While this heightened awareness served him well professionally, it also created a level of stress that required ongoing management. I still love this job and I still love living in Montana, Daniel told a department counselor during a 6-month follow-up session. But I'm much more aware of how quickly a routine situation can become life-threatening. It's made me a better officer, but it's also made me more conscious of the risks we face. Officer Stephanie Hayes experienced similar long-term effects, but found that her involvement in developing new wildlife protocols helped her process the trauma constructively. Working with wildlife experts gave her a better understanding of bear number 341's behavior and helped her feel that some good had come from the tragic encounter. Understanding why that bear behaved the way he did helped me make sense of what happened, Stephanie explained. It wasn't random violence or bad luck. It was the predictable result of a series of factors that we can identify and potentially prevent in the future. The 3 children involved in the incident each processed their experience differently, but all showed remarkable resilience. Casey Mitchell's interest in wildlife biology continued to grow, though tempered with a healthy respect for the power and unpredictability of wild animals. The Rodriguez twins, Emma and Ethan, became advocates for wildlife safety in their school, sharing their experience with other students to help them understand the realities of living in bear country. 2 years after the incident, the Aspen Ridge development had become a model for wildlife-conscious suburban development. Property values had actually increased as the community's reputation for safety and environmental responsibility attracted buyers who wanted to live responsibly in wildlife habitat. We've learned that you can have beautiful homes and neighborhoods without creating dangerous situations for wildlife or humans, said real estate agent Lisa Park, who specialized in properties in wildlife areas. The Aspen Ridge community has shown that with proper planning and community commitment, we can coexist safely. The incident also led to significant changes in how Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks approached problem bear management. New protocols called for more aggressive intervention when bears showed early signs of habituation, including the use of non-lethal deterrents and, when necessary, more rapid decisions about relocation or euthanization. We learned that waiting to see if a habituated bear will modify its behavior on its own is too risky, explained Dr. Martinez, who had become the state's lead expert on human-bear conflict management. Early intervention, while it may seem harsh, is actually more humane than allowing a situation to escalate to the point where lethal force becomes necessary. The Bear Number 341 incident had also sparked interest from researchers studying human-wildlife conflict around the world. The detailed documentation of the bear's behavioral escalation, combined with GPS tracking data and multiple witness accounts, provided an unprecedented data set for understanding how and why some bears become dangerous around humans. Dr. James Patterson, a behavioral ecologist from the University of Montana, used the incident as the foundation for a multi-year study of bear habituation in expanding suburban areas. His research team tracked dozens of bears in similar situations, looking for early warning signs that might predict dangerous behavioral changes. The Bear 341 case showed us that we need to look at individual personality traits, not just general bear behavior patterns, Dr. Patterson explained. Some bears, like some humans, are naturally bolder and more curious than others. When those personality traits are combined with habituation to human food sources, you get a potentially very dangerous situation. The research led to the development of new assessment tools that wildlife managers could use to evaluate the risk level of individual bears showing signs of habituation. These tools combined behavioral observations, GPS tracking data, and individual history to create risk profiles that help determine appropriate management responses. 5 years after the incident, Officer Daniel Brooks was promoted to sergeant and given responsibility for training all new officers in wildlife encounter protocols. His first-hand experience with an extreme situation, combined with his natural teaching ability, made him highly effective at preparing other officers for the realities of policing in bear country. Every officer who works in Montana needs to understand that they might face a situation like this, Daniel told a group of recruits during a training session. It's not common, thankfully, but when it happens, you need to be mentally and physically prepared to protect both human and animal lives to the extent possible. Officer Stephanie Hayes had been promoted to detective and specialized in cases involving environmental crimes and wildlife violations. Her experience with the Bear Number 341 incident gave her unique insights into the complex relationships between human behavior and wildlife conflicts. Most wildlife problems are really human problems, Detective Hayes explained to a conference of environmental law enforcement officers. When we can address the human behaviors that create dangerous situations for wildlife, we prevent tragedies for both animals and people. The Aspen Ridge development had become a destination for wildlife management professionals studying sustainable development in wildlife habitat. Delegations from communities facing similar challenges visited regularly to learn about the protocols and community structures that had emerged from the Bear Number 341 incident. "We had to learn the hard way through a tragic incident," said James Mitchell, who had become an unofficial spokesperson for the community's wildlife coexistence efforts. "But we're committed to sharing what we've learned so other communities don't have to go through what we experienced." The memorial to Bear Number 341 had grown into a small educational center that provided information about living safely in bear habitat. The center included interactive displays about bear behavior, proper food storage techniques, and emergency procedures for wildlife encounters. Casey Mitchell, now 15 years old and a sophomore in high school, volunteered at the center and had become an effective educator about wildlife safety. His personal experience with the incident, combined with his extensive knowledge of animal behavior, made him particularly effective at communicating with other young people about the realities of living in wildlife habitat. People think bears are either cute and harmless like teddy bears or monsters that want to hurt people, Casey explained to a group of middle school students during a presentation. The truth is that they're incredibly intelligent wild animals that can be dangerous if they're not treated with proper respect and understanding. The broader impact of the Bear Number 341 incident extended well beyond Bozeman and Montana. Wildlife agencies across North America studied the case and incorporated lessons learned into their own training and protocols. The incident had demonstrated that traditional approaches to human-bear conflict management needed to evolve as human development continued to expand into wildlife habitat. Dr. Rebecca Martinez had become a nationally recognized expert on human-wildlife conflict and was frequently called upon to consult on similar situations around the country. Her analysis of the Bear Number 341 incident formed the foundation for new federal guidelines on managing habituated bears in suburban environments. What happened in Bozeman was a wake-up call for all of us working in wildlife management, Dr. Martinez told a congressional hearing on human-wildlife conflict. As human populations continue to grow and expand into traditional wildlife habitat, we're going to see more of these challenging situations. We need to be proactive rather than reactive in our approach. The incident had also influenced policy discussions about land use planning and development in wildlife areas. Urban planners and wildlife biologists increasingly work together to design communities that minimize the potential for dangerous human-wildlife encounters while still allowing people to live in the natural environments they valued. The Bear 341 incident showed us that we can't just build wherever we want, without considering the impact on wildlife and the potential consequences for human safety, explained Dr. Susan Walsh, an urban planning professor who had studied the case extensively. Smart development in wildlife areas requires understanding animal behavior and designing communities that support coexistence. 10 years after the incident, the Aspen Ridge development had become a model for wildlife-conscious suburban development that was studied and replicated across the Mountain West. Property values remained strong, wildlife encounters were rare and generally non-threatening, and the community had developed a strong culture of environmental stewardship. We proved that you don't have to choose between beautiful places to live and wildlife safety, said Sandra Chen, who remained the Homeowners Association president a decade later. With proper planning, community commitment, and ongoing education, we can have both. The police officers involved in the incident had both built successful careers informed by their experience. Sergeant Daniel Brooks had become one of the most respected training officers in the state, and Detective Stephanie Hayes had developed a specialty in environmental crimes that made her valuable to agencies across the region. That incident changed both of our lives, but I think it made us better officers and better people, Detective Hayes reflected during a 10th anniversary interview. It taught us about courage under pressure, the importance of preparation and training, and the complexity of the relationship between humans and the natural world. The children who had been involved in the incident had all grown into young adults with deep appreciation for wildlife and strong commitments to environmental stewardship. Casey Mitchell was studying wildlife biology at the University of Montana and planned to pursue a career in human-wildlife conflict management. The Rodriguez twins had both chosen careers that reflected their experience. Emma was studying environmental law, while Ethan was pursuing emergency medical services. Growing up in Montana means living with wildlife, and our experience taught us that this is both a privilege and a responsibility, Emma Rodriguez said during her college graduation speech. We have an obligation to find ways to coexist that protect both human communities and the wildlife that makes this place so special. The Bear Number 341 incident continued to influence wildlife management policy and community development practices more than a decade later. The lessons learned from that September morning in Bozeman had helped prevent numerous similar tragedies and had contributed to more thoughtful approaches to development in wildlife habitat. Dr. Martinez, now retired but still active as a consultant, often reflected on how the incident had shaped her career and the field of wildlife management. That Bear's death was a tragedy, but the changes that resulted from it have undoubtedly saved both human and animal lives, she said. If we can learn from our mistakes and apply those lessons to prevent future conflicts, then Bear 341's legacy will be a positive one. The Memorial Center at Aspen Ridge had expanded over the years to become a regional resource for wildlife education and safety training. Thousands of visitors each year learned about living safely in bear country, and the center's programs had been credited with reducing wildlife conflicts throughout the region. Education is our best tool for preventing the kind of tragedy that occurred here, said the center's director, Dr. Michael Chang, a former student of Dr. Martinez who had dedicated his career to human-wildlife conflict prevention. When people understand wildlife behavior and take appropriate precautions, dangerous encounters become much less likely. The incident had also contributed to advances in wildlife tracking and monitoring technology. The GPS collar data from Bear Number 341 had demonstrated the value of real-time monitoring of potentially problematic animals, leading to improved early warning systems that could alert communities when habituated bears were moving into populated areas. Technology is giving us new tools for managing human-wildlife conflicts before they become dangerous, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, a wildlife biologist who had developed some of the new monitoring systems. We can now track individual animals and identify concerning behavior patterns much earlier, allowing us to intervene before situations escalate. The Bozeman Police Department had become a model for other agencies dealing with wildlife conflicts, hosting training sessions and sharing protocols developed in the aftermath of the Bear Number 341 incident. The department's expertise was sought by communities across the West that were experiencing similar challenges with expanding human development in wildlife habitat. We learned these lessons the hard way, but we're committed to helping other agencies benefit from our experience, said Chief Walsh, who had remained with the department and oversaw the development of its wildlife response capabilities. Every community that exists in wildlife habitat needs to be prepared for these challenges. 20 years after the incident, the Aspen Ridge development celebrated 2 decades of successful coexistence with wildlife. The community had experienced no serious wildlife conflicts since implementing the protocols developed following the Bear No. 341 incident, and had become a destination for people who wanted to live responsibly in natural environments. We've shown that it's possible to build beautiful communities in wildlife habitat without creating dangerous situations, said retired engineer James Mitchell, now in his 80s but still active in community wildlife education efforts. It requires commitment, education, and ongoing vigilance, but the results are worth it. The lessons learned from the Bear No. 341 incident had spread far beyond Montana, influencing wildlife management practices and community development policies across North America and around the world. The detailed documentation of the incident and its aftermath had provided a template for other communities facing similar challenges. The Bozeman incident became a turning point in how we think about human-wildlife conflict, said Dr. Jennifer Adams, an international expert on wildlife management who had studied the case extensively. It demonstrated both the complexity of these issues and the possibility of finding solutions that protect both people and wildlife. As communities across the world continued to expand into wildlife habitat, the lessons from that September morning in 2025 remained relevant and important. The incident had shown that coexistence was possible, but only with proper planning, community commitment, and respect for the power and intelligence of wild animals. The legacy of Bear No. 341 lived on in the policies, protocols, and communities that had been shaped by the tragedy of his death. While his life had ended in conflict, the changes that resulted from that conflict had helped ensure that future generations of both humans and bears might coexist more safely in the landscapes they shared. Officer Daniel Brooks, now nearing retirement after a distinguished career in law enforcement, often visited the Memorial Center at Aspen Ridge to speak with visitors about the incident. His first-hand account of that morning continued to educate and inspire people working to prevent similar conflicts. "We faced an unprecedented situation that morning, and we did our best with the knowledge and tools we had available," Brooks would tell visitors. "The tragedy is that it came to violence, but the hope is in everything we've learned since then. If we can use this experience to prevent future conflicts, then something positive will have come from a very difficult day." The Bear No. 341 incident remained a defining moment for everyone involved, a reminder of both the challenges and opportunities that come with living in one of the world's most beautiful and wild places. The lessons learned that September morning continued to influence how communities approached the complex relationship between human development and wildlife conservation, ensuring that the legacy of that tragic encounter would be measured not in conflict, but in coexistence.